Hey everyone, welcome along to the final session ahead of your final exam, paper three. Very quickly, just to start off by saying thank you to all of you guys who've been very kind in your messages, emails, all sorts. I really appreciate it. I'm so sorry that I haven't had a chance to respond to a lot of you guys. I will, as always, start off by telling you that I will disappoint some of you. I will disappoint you because if you're here thinking that it's going to be a predicted paper, this is not where it's happening. I will try and go through as many topics as I possibly can. And I will try to go through as many of the questions and topics that you guys raised as concerns, but in particular topics that I also feel are more likely to come up, not a prediction, just to clarify. By the end of the session, I hope that you guys will feel really confident going into your exam on Thursday. Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I want to just address first and foremost in terms of kind of myths and etc. about paper three. The very first thing is that paper three, the 25 marker is the only question where there is the expectation that you are going to do one detailed analysis for micro and one detailed analysis for macro. There is no other question where you need to do that. You don't need to do that for the 12, the 8, or the 5. It normally makes sense then to answer the 5, 8, or 12 just based off whether it's micro or macro. Now, you can incorporate micro and macro. I don't really see a need to. If it's easier to do it, then go for it for that particular question, but it's very rare that that is the case, yeah? So that's the first. Just in terms of how you get the best out of this session before we actually dive in. I honestly, I don't need your donations. I appreciate it, but I don't need it. What I really need is your attention. For the next 2 to 3 hours, you have my absolute guarantee that I will give you everything. That by the end of it, you should feel pumped, that you should be ready for the exam, even if it was tomorrow. So without further ado, let's get started. What I want to start off with today is to basically talk about a particular 12 marker that I think is fairly challenging. And it comes from the 2022 paper. So I'm going to just share my screen and let's dive right in. So in 2022, paper three, putting up the question now, they had an extract about Kenya. And the extract the extract itself wasn't the challenge, it was the question itself. So can I just show you guys? Here we go. So paper three, June 2022, question about Kenya, 12 marker. And it said the following. So there's a second data response. Here we go. It says, using the example of cut flowers, discuss how the concept of absolute advantage may lead to growth in Kenya. Use numerical or diagrammatic analysis in your answer. Now, that last part of the question threw people off because they were like, what in the world is this? Like, what does he mean by diagrammatic, numerical? There weren't any numbers provided really in the extract, yeah? So let's dissect the question together. And a good way to understand this is Edexcel's expectations of you are based on what they've already shown you in the past. So first and foremost, let's just start off with the definition of absolute advantage. What is absolute advantage? Well, absolute advantage is simply where a country can produce more of a good or service than another country. It's as simple as that. So if I can make more, let's say copper, then I have an absolute advantage in the production of copper. So our starting point is to define that in our answer. Now, if you read the extract, I will go through snippets of the extract in a second. It's very clear that Kenya has an absolute advantage when it comes to cut flowers. They have the right proximity to the equator, the natural sunlight, the labor cost. They list a couple of things to explain why clearly they are very good at producing cut flowers, okay? Now, the bit that's confusing for people is use numerical or diagrammatic analysis. Like, what do they mean by that? And the way that I will show it to you guys is actually from a past paper, and then we're going to answer this together. Well, if I go to paper two, so I go back here, and the specimen paper in paper two, so macro, they presented you guys, and hopefully as part of your revision, you may have encountered this question, with the following little diagram. So just sharing my screen over here. Okay, here we go. So question number 5, if you guys look at it, there. It shows Colombia and Zambia each produce copper and emeralds, right? The whole point of me showing you this is as follows, is that if you're asked to show either comparative advantage or absolute advantage, when they talk about numerical examples or diagrammatic analysis, this is what they mean. They basically want you to illustrate, and you make up your numbers, by the way, why Kenya has an absolute advantage, just to show that they have an absolute advantage when it comes to cut flowers, yeah? Okay, right, let me unshare this and let's actually dig into the question together and write it up. So let me share this and let's go. Right, our starting point is obviously to define absolute advantage, which I just did earlier, yeah? The next thing you're going to do is you're going to provide me evidence from the data that they clearly have an absolute advantage so you can get some application. As soon as you do that now, you will now draw this diagram. So you're going to basically draw the following axes. So on the y-axis, we're going to have cut flowers, because obviously that was what they were asking us about. On the x-axis, now, it's up to you. You could have actually just made it up. But in the extract, when you read it, it says that the Netherlands, who also produce cut flowers, have an absolute advantage, or they seem to have an advantage in machinery. Yeah, so I'm going to basically put on the x-axis machinery. And from here, I make up numbers. It's up to us, as long as we illustrate very clearly that Kenya has an absolute advantage in cut flowers and Netherlands has an absolute advantage in machineries. That is all that matters. So I'm going to do something like this. So go, I don't know, let's make up numbers. Let's say like 30,000. Who cares? Yeah. And 1,000 over here. And this is Kenya. Okay. Well, I need to make sure that the Netherlands produce less cut flowers, but more machinery. So I don't know, let's say somewhere like this. So let's say that, let's not to scale it in any way. 18,000 over here, maybe. And let's say this is 10,000. And this is Netherlands. I have now satisfied the criteria of drawing or giving them diagrammatic analysis or numeric. I give them both. I give them both diagrammatic and numerical. Like, here you go. Okay, now we've gone through that. Let's just understand what the next phase is. After we do that, we basically go, okay, if Kenya has an absolute advantage, it could have been by the comparative as well, but they were asking about absolute, so stick to that. If Kenya has an absolute advantage in the production of cut flowers, what should Kenya do? Well, clearly, Kenya should specialize. Because if they specialize in that, they're going to become really good at producing cut flowers. And now we can slightly incorporate a little bit of micro into this. Even though the overall answer needs to go back to economic growth, which is obviously macro, there's a very clever thing that I want you guys to recognize, is that whenever you have a comparative advantage, or in this case, an absolute advantage, what you need to do is specialize, because if you specialize, you can tap into greater economies of scale. If I produce en masse cut flowers, I am now able to basically bulk buy things like my seeds. I can bulk buy fertilizer, whatever. Yeah, don't have to give a whole list of like farming equipment, but you just tell me one thing. By specializing and then tapping into your comparative advantage, you guys agree that the cost per unit goes down. And if the cost per unit goes down, do you guys agree that the price they charge for their cut flowers also goes down? And therefore, we are now at a point where we can make an easy macro point. Whenever you're dealing with prices on a macro level, whether it's inflation or whether it's the exchange rate, I need you guys to understand that we're dealing with competitiveness. Are you more or less price competitive? Well, if I am cheaper, if my cut flowers are now cheaper, I am more price competitive. My products are now more attractive in the global market. As a result, then if I'm more price competitive, what happens to my exports? My exports go up. And exports minus imports is a component of AD. And therefore, AD will shift out. And if you want to add a bonus, you could talk about how exports are also an injection into the circular flow of income. So there'll be a positive multiplier effect. You now draw basic diagram, but you draw this. You now go, all right. So you're going to have two diagrams, by the way, in this one analysis. It's going to be one chunky analysis, and that will be sufficient. There'll be nothing left for us to say. So we're going to have the following. So if I draw it out over here, I've got price level over here, so inflation, and real GDP over here. Okay, right. So there we go. Here's LRAS. Now you can show off if you wanted to, if you had the time, which is that you draw AD to begin with over here. So Y1, P1. And then you shift it out once, but you can actually shift it a second time. And the second shift is because of the positive multiplier effect. So the first shift is because exports are going up. And the second shift is because of the positive multiplier effect that occurs in Kenya because exports are an injection, yeah? So that's Y3. Right. Remember, we need to obviously make sure that we answer the question. We always need to answer what they've asked and not what we wanted it to be. Well, they clearly asked about economic growth. Well, what happened to economic growth? Well, obviously, economic growth has gone up. Economic growth goes up from Y1 to Y3. You're done. You got 8 out of 8 analysis, trust me. Yeah, that is phenomenal analysis. Now, evaluations for a 12 marker. One well-developed evaluation is sufficient, just so you are aware. 2, if you're unsure and you can't develop them very well, but be very wary of timing. I would rather, if you're running out of time, and we'll set out all the timings later today or tomorrow, but if you're running out of time, just write one. You might get 2 marks, you might get 3 marks. Accept it. It's okay. Move on to the 25 marker. This is very time pressured. Okay, let's work out a really clever evaluation. I'm going to give you guys 2. They're both really clever. And actually, those evaluations in isolation would be sufficient to give you the 4 marks, but just to kind of go through 2 things. The first thing that you could talk about is, although Kenya obviously has an absolute advantage in cut flowers compared to the Netherlands, can you think of certain countries who might still buy their cut flowers from the Netherlands? Well, I can think of about 26 countries that might buy it from the Netherlands. Any country in the EU. Why? Because in the EU, they have free trade with the Netherlands, but they don't have free trade with Kenya. Therefore, if you factor in that not only is there a massive transportation cost, because it has to go all the way from there into the EU, but also that they have free trade, whereas with Kenya, they don't, then actually it may not make sense to basically buy your cut flowers from Kenya. So actually specializing in cut flowers may not be the best idea in the world for Kenya if that's their biggest market. The other thing is the UK, even us, it doesn't make sense for us to buy too much cut flowers from Kenya because proximity, we are a lot closer geographically to the Netherlands. So when you factor in the transportation costs, and bear in mind it's flowers, like they can go off, it makes sense for us to basically buy the majority of our flowers from the Netherlands. And actually, you've got data to support you. And remember, by the way, evaluations, yeah, as an application, sorry, can be applied at any point in the exam, not just into analysis. There's a common myth. So if I just quickly show you the extract really fast. So if we go back to the Kenya one, look at the very first sentence. The very first sentence is, in the UK, 80% of cut flowers come via the Netherlands. Okay? In other words, clearly, despite the fact that Kenya has an absolute advantage, we still trade predominantly with the Netherlands, yeah? That is a really clever evaluation. And it will always work to question things like, oh, well, it actually depends on transportation. It depends on like how far away you are, whether you're in a trading block, etc. Anyways, that's one. Number two, the other thing that I could talk about is if I said to you guys need to go and buy flowers, where would you go buy flowers from? Now, some of you might be saying, oh, I'll buy it from a florist. Okay, where's your nearest florist? Do you know without Google? You probably don't, yeah? The vast majority of people, when they go and buy their flowers, you know where they buy it from? They buy it from supermarkets. That's a clue. Why is that a clue? Because if the Kenyans are selling the majority of their flowers to supermarkets like Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's, what might Tesco exert over the Kenyans? Well, what they might exert is a higher degree of monopsony power. They can basically squeeze the Kenyans. Ooh, they can squeeze their profit margins and be like, excuse me, you have to reduce your prices even further. It's very nice that you're offering us a low price. You need to reduce it more. And therefore, actually, specializing in this may not be the best idea because you can't actually generate that much revenue. Or export earnings might not be very high. And again, there is evidence in the data to support the idea that this isn't that big a deal. Well, look at this. It says it contributes to around 1% of the country's GDP. 1%? Like, that's not that big a deal. So again, specializing as a means of basically growing your economy through cut flowers may not be the best idea in the world. 12 out of 12. Let's go. Next topic. The next thing I want to go through is trading blocks. I have for many years now, those of you who have watched previous voice recordings of these, I've been banging on about how it makes a lot of sense for them to put together an extract about the Eurozone and Croatia or just a monetary union. And it keeps spiting me. I don't know. Maybe this year, finally, they might actually put something together that basically has that. Let's prepare for it in the event that it does come up. So there are, I think, two types of realistic questions that could come up in regards to trading blocks. 25 markers. One of them is the effect on a micro and macroeconomic effect of joining a monetary union. Now, we're going to use the Eurozone as our example, but it could be another example that they give you. But the other one is also to talk about what the effect is of the UK leaving the EU. Now, that is, I think, a more challenging question. I'll deal with both. Let's begin with the following made-up question. Evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of Croatia joining the Eurozone or any country joining a monetary union. Okay, I need you guys to understand that the micro point that you do in the 25 marker, in about 95% of cases, I want it to be a cost and revenue diagram. If you can draw me a cost and revenue diagram and shift the appropriate curves, you're smashing it. You're going to get an amazing grade. That is really impressive for examiners and they love it in paper 3, yeah? For macro, normally we're going to delve into things like economic growth. So it'll be like LRAS, AD, okay? Right, let's just do a quick plan in terms of what's good and bad about joining a monetary union to begin with. Firstly, what is a monetary union? A monetary union is basically the most extreme form of trading bloc that exists in real life. And it has the following characteristics. So number one, there is free trade between the member states. Number two is there is a common external tariff. In other words, anyone that wants to trade with any of the member states has to pay the same tariff if they're outside the bloc. Number three is there is free movement of labor and capital. So there's nothing stopping someone from Germany from relocating to France. You don't have to get a visa or anything like that. Number four is they also now share a common currency, okay? So in the Eurozone, obviously the currency they share is the euro, yeah? Okay, if I go through the good and bad things just generally, I can then pick and choose what I want to make my micro point and what I want to be my macro point. The first good thing about joining a monetary union is trade creation. There is a higher volume of trade because of the fact that there is easier trading conditions. So entering any trading block, by the way, creates the kind of right conditions for trade to occur. Because if there's like free trade now that didn't exist before, if it was like, let's say, a single market or a customs union, well, what happens is that countries can now tap into their comparative advantage. They can specialize, and then they can generate export-led growth. Exports components of AD, easy peasy. That's one thing we could talk about. Another thing that we could talk about as a good thing about this is the fact that it's really easy for firms to trade and they don't need to worry now about unfavorable exchange rate movements. Now, I'm going to really delve into that point in a second because I think that is a really good one to do as our micro point, yeah? The other thing is that it eliminates transaction costs. Again, I will explain this in a second because this is going to be our macro point. A micro point, sorry. The very final thing is that being part of a monetary union or any trading bloc, especially a single market, it's amazing because it's likely to attract FDI. TNCs get attracted to trading blocks because they can now sell their goods to all these countries for free trade. Yeah, great example of that, and we're going to show you from a past paper question, by the way, is Ireland. They've generated huge amounts of FDI. Yeah. Anyways, let's go. Let's delve into this. I think that you should always begin with your stronger foot. Start with whatever point you feel you can develop in more detail and that you know you can evaluate to a very high level. And so for me, the macro evaluation is going to be the best point in the entire essay. Therefore, I want to start with a macro analysis. And it's going to go like this. One macroeconomic effect of Croatia joining the Eurozone is higher economic growth. Nice and easy. Yeah. So the overarching point is that we're going to talk about economic growth. Okay. Now, be careful because if it is about a country joining a monetary union, they would have already been part of the single market to begin with. So Croatia already had free trade. They already had free movement of labor. So be careful not to make points that don't make sense, like saying things like, oh, there's now free movement of labor. Well, there was already. But what you can talk about is the fact that it's going to attract TNCs. It becomes an even more attractive destination for TNCs to set up because they get access to the free trade area or the whole free trade within the bloc. But also the fact that if they're outside of the trading bloc, they would want to relocate to a country like Croatia because they can avoid the common external tariff, right? If I'm an American firm, it makes sense for me to set up my headquarters within the Eurozone because then I can then trade with the Euro, but also I don't need to pay the tariff, right? Okay, we're going to give the evidence of Ireland. Right, the extract obviously is very helpful, by the way, for paper 3, so incorporate that into your answer. But can I just show you how past papers is just the way to go all the time? So if I go to old spec, unit 4, there's a stat in here that honestly, to this day, mathematically just doesn't make sense to me in my head, but we're going to accept it as fact because it's a data response and it's based on fact. So we're going to go with it. Let's see. So June 2016. Let's have a look. So question number 5 has a whole extract about Ireland. And it's all about how like they've generated huge amounts of export-led growth and things like that. Yeah. So yeah, here we go. Ireland leaves Eurozone behind as exports boom. Okay, right. There's a particular thing here that I want to draw your attention to, yeah? It shows a couple of things. The first thing that it shows is that Irish exports rose 12% between 2013 and 2014 at a time when world trade was stable. Their biggest export earners are Google, Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer. There's your evidence of TNC setting up within the Eurozone because it's obviously very attractive. And part of it is obviously the Ireland has really low corporation tax as well, but a big part of it is that Ireland are part of the Eurozone, yeah? So that's the kind of thing that I want you guys to basically incorporate into your answer, yeah? That, yeah? Okay, cool. So that's, let's go back to the answer that we're putting together over here, okay. So the way I want you to develop it is to say that, look, it's going to be more attractive for TNC to set up. Now, you have 2 routes you can go down. Either you can talk about how the TNCs will then export their products across the block, in which case export earnings go up, the current account gets better, X minus M is a component of AD will shift out, injection, multiplier, go crazy, yeah? But alternatively, you can also talk about investment, FDI, investment is a component of AD. So if if investment rises, AD shifts out. It's also an injection, multiplier, etc., etc. So in the end, you are drawing me the same diagram I drew earlier with the Kenya question, where the LRAS curve is drawn and AD is shifting out 2 times. That is our first analysis, and it's excellent. The evaluation that I want all of you to do, if this does come up, is to talk about how the big problem, the big issue with being part of a monetary union is the loss of monetary independence. What does that mean? How many central banks are there in the Eurozone? Well, the answer is there is one central bank. The European Central Bank, they have to set an interest rate that works for all of the member states. When they set up the Eurozone, they kept banging on about how one size fits all. One size has utterly and completely not fit all. It just has not fit all. Because at one point, the Greek economy was in a really deep recession, whilst the German economy was booming. It had like crazy levels of growth. So if we just kind of work that out in terms of like the logic of what's happening. So let's just write this down. It says loss of monetary independence. Okay, let's be the central bank together. Good revision actually for monetary policy. If a country has high levels of growth, the thing about high levels of growth, if I just draw it really quickly over here, it means that they're somewhere over there. Yeah, the economy is starting to what we call overheat. In other words, the inflation rate in Germany would have been pretty high. What kind of interest rate would Germany have required in order to reduce inflation? Well, if you think about it, you want to shift AD inwards. And the way that you shift AD inwards is you raise interest rates. Why? Because if interest rates are high, people have more incentive to save, and therefore they consume less. Consumption goes down, AD shifts inwards. So The Germans would have wanted a high interest rate. They want high IR. Yeah. The Greeks, on the other hand, their economy is in a state of absolute like demise. They're doing terribly at this point in time. So they're desperate to shift AD outwards to get growth. What kind of interest rate do they need? Obviously, the opposite. They need a low interest rate. Yeah. Is it possible for the European Central Bank to set an interest rate that works for both countries? The answer is such a definitive no, absolutely no way. Yeah. And this is a massive problem because when Croatia joined the Eurozone, if, for example, their economic needs are not the needs of the average kind of within the Eurozone, well, the central bank are not going to cater to their needs. They're going to cater to the kind of majority. Yeah. And that's a problem because of the fact that they now lose one half of their demand side policy tools. Problem. Yeah. Now, this is already fantastic. And if it's not about the Eurozone, no problem, by the way, because you can still talk about it in terms of like two countries within the bloc. One of them might be a really strong economy, might be a weak economy. And you're explaining that, well, the strong economy, when it starts to grow, might need high interest rates to relieve inflation. The weak economy might need low interest rates to stimulate growth. It still works. Yeah. Now, one of the years, I think it was like in 2013, I'm probably misremembering. Basically, they asked the question about the UK joining the Eurozone. Obviously, that ship has very much sailed. They're not going to ask that. But there was something in there, and the examiner report has, I think, my favorite answer I have ever read in my life from a student. Whoever this kid is, you are a legend. Yeah. They threw in a stat. Now, I have amended the stat for you. It may be slightly outdated. It's fine. They're not going to know anyway. Basically, I'm going to tell you the stat and I want to see if you guys can work out why the stat is relevant to this evaluation. Home ownership in Greece is approximately 75%. About 75% of Greeks own their house, compared to about 45%, around 45, 50% in Germany. Germany have a culture of renting. Basically, the government own loads of the flats and buildings, and then they rent it out. Right. Well, why is that relevant? It is relevant because even when the central bank adjusts the interest rates, the impact is not uniform. In other words, it doesn't impact each economy the same because a lot of these homeowners are likely to have mortgages, tracker mortgages, variable mortgages that are just based on the base rate. In other words, if there are more homeowners in Greece, when the interest rates are raised, as an example, there are far more Greeks who are likely to have a tracker mortgage who suddenly now pay a higher amount of interest on their mortgage. Therefore, AD for them might shift a lot more inwards than it would be in Germany. Does that make sense? Yeah. That is exceptional evaluation. Like that is unbelievable. Yeah. Right. We've done all the macro. By the way, also just to because this is our first 25 marker of the session, I want you guys to very clearly signpost to the examiner what point this is. So in other words, it will be one macroeconomic effect of Croatia joining the Eurozone is economic growth. Yeah. You really clearly show them this is my macro point, and then now we're going to do micro. Let's talk about micro. Remember how I said I want to bring it back to cost and revenue wherever I can. Let's deal with it. On a micro level, so this was macro. On a micro level, it's really good for Croatian firms for several reasons. So we're going to overarching point is going to be one microeconomic effect of Croatia joining the Eurozone is higher profits for Croatian firms. Why? Well, there are two reasons. Number one is Croatian firms now find it even easier to trade because of the fact that they don't need to worry about unfavorable exchange rate movements affecting their profit margins. Can I just explain what that is? Yeah. So before they joined the Eurozone, they had their currency was called the kuna. Yeah. Now, if I said, imagine their main trading partners, it's true, by the way, are Italy and Germany. They do a lot of trade with Germany and Italy. Yeah. If the kuna suddenly madly depreciates against the euro, would you guys agree that everything that Croatian firms are exporting are now cheaper and everything that they are importing is now suddenly more expensive? And they're often tied into trade contracts. So their profit margins are really badly being exploited, as in they're really, really bad. And some of them might even have to shut down. Well, now, if I join the Eurozone, can one euro ever be weaker or stronger than another euro? Well, the answer is obviously no. Does that make it easier or harder for me to basically plan ahead? Well, significantly easier. The whole point then is that I have a lot more certainty. Firms have a lot more confidence, and that confidence translates into hopefully higher levels of investment into capital machinery, which increases productivity. So that's going to be one angle that we can kind of approach this from. Within that paragraph, the other thing that you could talk about, so not only is it kind of the element of certainty, the other thing is transaction costs, right? Can I explain what that is? So, you know, when you convert from pounds to euros or pounds to dollars, yeah, there's a middleman. There's someone in between who basically takes a commission. Okay, well, if I now don't need to think about it, but businesses in particular in Croatia, do you guys accept that for businesses in Croatia, they would be doing hundreds of thousands of kind of conversions every year, probably millions, right? Therefore, the amount that they basically pay in conversion fees is very, very high for transaction costs. Well, now they don't need to convert it because they're using the same currency as their main trading partners, Germany and Italy. In other words, their costs are going to go down. And what cost is it? It's a variable cost. Every single unit now to produce is cheaper because constantly now it's cheaper for them to basically, they don't have to convert anything. And now we can draw our diagram. And our diagram is going to look like this. You guys need to be really good at drawing these diagrams, by the way. If you haven't got used to drawing them, watch our step-by-step on YouTube and become amazing, basically. Right, so cost revenue. All right, so I'm going to go MC first over here. Then we have AR equals D and MR. By the way, those of you that are complaining about the speed of the session, this is recorded, so you will watch it back later. I obviously want to cover as much as I possibly can, so listen as much as anything. You obviously take notes, but the most important thing is that this is all hopefully making sense and that you guys understand how to incorporate this into the exam, yeah? So anyways, I want a firm to make supernormal profit, so I'm going to just do something like this. That's AC. My guiding point is Q1. I go up from there till I hit the AC curve. That's C1. Now remember, you guys, because you can't change color, make sure that you're labeling the corners of your areas in letters. So we've got P1, AB, C1, okay? All right, what we just said is that their variable costs are going to be going down due to the fact that they're going to invest and therefore productivity levels go up, but also because of the fact that the transaction fees are now eliminated. MC and AC therefore fall. And if MC and AC fall, what ends up happening is, also the order that I want you to do it in is MC always, 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 yeah? So MC down. No, this is not pre-recorded. I don't know why you guys constantly ask that question, but anyways, right. This is the new level of output, Q2. And then we go up till we hit the demand curve, P2, okay? And very final thing that we're going to do is we're going to also shift the AC down. Remember, it needs to intersect the new MC curve at its lowest point. As in when it intersects, that's its lowest point. So somewhere like here. I'm going to go outwards, AC2. My new best friend is Q2. I go up from Q2 until I hit the AC curve, the new one, and that's C2, D and E. Okay, cool. Right, let's summarize the diagram. There are a couple of things going on here. The first thing is that the price that consumers are going to be charged for this product is going to decrease. Now you can show off. You don't have to because there's going to be enough depth anyway here, but to show off, whenever prices are going down, you can say, then allocative efficiency is going up. Wonderful. Their sales are going to go up from Q1 to Q2, yeah? Their costs are falling from C1 to C2, more productively efficient. Happy days for us. Now, I can talk about profitability. I just want to show you guys one thing. Now, if this doesn't make entire sense, especially at this late stage before your exam, it's really okay, yeah? But there's a very clever way of adding more depth for questions where the variable costs are falling. Now, I'd only do this in a 25 marker. I would not do this in a 12. There's just not enough time for this. But in a 25 marker, my question to you guys is this, and I think I may have potentially asked this before in another live stream. But the question is at the profit maximizing level of outputs, that's a very specific quantity, at the quantity Q1 initially, is demand elastic, inelastic, or unit elastic? What's the answer? Well, to answer it, I actually want to show you guys why and make sense of it so that at least there's kind of something that you can think about. So I'm going to just scroll down over here for a second. Right, if I draw you guys, here's P, here's Q, a straight downward sloping demand curve like this. Okay, so that's demand, which we know is equal to AR, yeah? The common misconception about this is that the elasticity is constant across the curve. That is not true. Elasticity varies at different points on that curve, yeah? Those of you that are on TikTok, by the way, if you come on YouTube, you'll be able to see what I'm drawing, yeah? The midpoint of a demand curve, that point there, is where elasticity is equal to 1, which hopefully you all know is unit elastic, yeah? Then we have a range, which is up here, above that point, where elasticity is greater than 1, so obviously elastic. And then the range over here, where elasticity is less than 1, and obviously then inelastic. Okay, let's make sense of this. I need things to make sense to you guys. The reason why I need it to make sense is because economics is one of those subjects where even if you're stuck in the exam, you can work it out. I don't need you to memorize everything. It's just a question of going, okay, what is logically happening here, yeah? Okay, well, first things first. Let's understand why that point, the midpoint, is where it is unit elastic first. And from now on, I apologize for my language, but I want you to remember P star as the taking the piss point. Okay? Let's understand why. Because if I initially, for this particular good, let's say this is the demand curve for this product, and I initially charge a price of P1 over here. Right, is P1 a high price or a low price? Would you guys agree that for that particular good, this is a very low price? It's very, very cheap. Okay, I now decide to raise the price. I raise the price from P1 to P2. Now, whenever prices go up, of course, the price going up means demand will go down. People will reduce how much they buy. They might switch to other substitutes, or they just can't afford to buy as much, right? However, do you guys accept that the price P2 is still a pretty low price? True? Is demand therefore likely to dramatically fall or not really? Well, the answer is that it isn't really likely to drop very much because it's still a pretty cheap price. Hence why that segment over here, where prices are rising from P1 up to P star, is inelastic. It is not very responsive because it's still pretty cheap. But I keep raising my price up until the point where I get to P star. Now the consumers go, kind of taking the piss, going to be expensive. Yeah. And now if I raise my price from P star to, let's say over here, P3, is that a high price or a low price? Well, do you guys accept that that is a pretty high price? And now, therefore, when I raise the price, it results in a more than proportionate decrease in demand. Now, this good is more elastic at those price points. Cool. With that in mind, so now that we basically understand that that is the case, if I just get rid of these numbers for a second, get rid of these, yeah? And I say to you guys, okay, let's say this number was 10, AR was there. Do you know what I know for an absolute fact this is? This must be 5. It has to be half of it, right? And therefore, MR must be going through exactly, let's fix this, hopefully it will bend to my will. Lovely. Technology, great. It will bend there, and there we go. MR cuts through the x-axis, where MR equals 0, where revenue maximization occurs basically, is exactly at that point. It's at the midpoint. Okay, so I asked my question again. My question then is, at the profit maximizing level of output for a firm like Apple or whoever it is, yeah? Are they operating at the elastic or inelastic section of demand? Well, do you guys see where MR equals 0? If I go up from there, that's the demand there. We are always operating to the left of that level of output, by the way. MC will always equal MR at the profit maximizing level of output at the elastic section of demand. Always, 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 yeah? And therefore, as a bonus point, you can now say the following. When they reduce their price from P1 to P2, this is likely to result in a more than proportionate increase in demand for their products. So what we do, we go price, if I just show you that in like just with arrows, price is going down, demand, of course, it has to go up. But now that I know it's elastic, demand is highly reactive. Equals TR must be going up. Anyways, prices fall, more than proportionate increase in demand, higher revenue for the firms. And if they have higher revenue, whilst they also have lower costs, profitability obviously is rising. And whenever their profits go up, what I now want you to say is give me an example of what they could invest the money into. Any new technology. I don't know, let's say it's a car company. You could talk about how basically they can invest into like self-driving cars or like longer batteries and I don't know, whatever, yeah? Use the data to the best of your ability, but like even just making it up yourself, that is application. And then wrap up that beautiful point with, oh, but that therefore leads to higher levels of dynamic efficiency. What a paragraph, by the way, yeah? That is the analysis. Let's eval. If you remember earlier, I was going through a couple of bad things about being part of a monetary union. The best one we did already, which is that you lose monetary independence. The other thing is if you're ever stuck in any trading block question, is to take a step back and go to yourself, okay, what topic is this under, like broadly? Trading blocks comes under globalization. And therefore, any of the bad things about globalization are evaluations here. Well, one of the bad things about globalization is that countries become too interdependent. Croatian firms become so dependent upon their main trading partners. In other words, if suddenly now there's mismanagement in a country like Italy, because Italy is like one of their main trading partners, there's a problem. Because if Italy now go into a recession, then incomes are falling in Italy. If incomes are falling in Italy, is there more or less demand for Croatian goods? There's less demand for Croatian goods, especially those that are big exporters. You can now draw AR and MR shifting inwards. You don't have to, by the way, and especially time-wise, you may not have the time to do that. You can just explain it in words, but if you've got the time, you can draw it. Show AR and MR shifting inwards. The last thing, by the way, as a bonus, and again, I am speculating, I don't know, and I honestly like use the data, like don't base it entirely on what I'm telling you guys, but Croatia has, over the last couple of years, been really strong in terms of tourism, or like their tourism sector started to grow. Yeah, partly because of Game of Thrones, by the way, real life trivia, but whatever. And also best festival. Ultra, yeah, is that Ultra? Yeah. See you guys there? No, not gonna be there. Anyways, basically, the point is that because of that, they have a really strong tourism sector. But what about tourism? The thing about tourism is income elastic. So the YED, think about it. YED, if it's elastic and then incomes are falling and your main like visitors, like the people in the EU or the Eurozone, their incomes are falling, there's a more than proportionate decrease in demand for your product. That's a problem. And therefore, a lot of these businesses may start shutting down because of their over-reliance on other countries. Cool? That's our first question. Oh, well, first trading block question. Let's deal with the more disgusting question. Now, the thing about this is I cannot emphasize enough that I trust you guys to be able to navigate your way through the exam and to utilize the data. This has never been asked before. Yeah, this is not something that they've asked before. So I have no reference point in terms of examiner reports, mark schemes, etc. Obviously, the theory is the theory, and the theory will always be valid. but the extracts are meant to help you, especially in paper 3. So you might incorporate certain topics or certain points that I am not talking about in the question I'm about to do that you feel are better, or that you feel you can develop in more detail. Go for it. But here is a good skeleton for the following questions. Evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of the UK's decision to leave the EU. Dum, dum, dum. Right. Let me just have a sip of my Red Bull. Give me a sec. Let's do it. You ready? I think, as weird as this is, despite the fact that this is a macro topic, that the micro point is slightly easier. So we're going to start with that. We're going to begin with the micro point and talk about how Brexit is probably very damaging to British firms. Yeah. So again, I want a really clear topic sentence. It will be something like this. It would say something like, one microeconomic effect of the UK's decision to leave the EU is lower profits for British firms. Okay. Now, there'll probably be evidence in the data of this. Use the data. Yeah. So that's the first thing. Now, why is it that their profits are likely to go down? The first issue is that whereas before they had free trade, so when they were exporting their goods into the biggest single market in the world, the EU, they wouldn't have had to basically pay any tax, no tariff. Now they have to pay a tax. That in itself, by the way, increases their cost. It's a variable cost. That's one. But the second is that one of the benefits of being part of the EU is that you have free movement of labor. And free movement of labor means that labor would have been geographically mobile. Now labor is geographically immobile, right? That's a problem. And the reason why it's problematic is because, one, firms are going to struggle to get really high quality talent to come into their economy. But two, and this is actually true, what happened in the aftermath of Brexit is that there were a lot of people that left. The two industries that I know of in terms of real world knowledge, but again, there'll be an extract to base it off this, where there were skill shortages or a lot of like laborers left, were fruit pickers, hence why supermarket prices ended up going up, well, part of the reason. So fruit pickers, and number two is HGV drivers. Those, you know, those massive lorries, yeah? Loads of the drivers were Europeans and they left. Okay, what can we do? Well, we can basically start off with is a very basic thing. So overarching point is profitability is going to go down. If you suddenly get loads of workers leaving the economy, well, I can draw a very basic labor diagram. Well, if I draw the following over here, so let's draw it. So I've got quantity of labor on the x-axis and wage rate on the y-axis. All right. Supply, S1, demand, D1. Okay, so that's Q1, that's W1. All right, very basic point. To begin with, if workers are leaving or firms are struggling to basically get people to come take up jobs, the supply of labor is shifting inwards. Yeah, so supply goes in like that. What does that do to the wages they have to pay, for example, to get a HGV driver or a fruit picker? Well, obviously the wages go up. Now, if wages are rising for the firm, what is happening to their variable costs? Their variable costs are going up. And now we're in happy land. Why are we in happy land? Because we know how to draw cost and revenue diagrams like that. And we draw MC and AC going up, and then you've got a million things to talk about. The first thing you can talk about is the fact that the prices they're going to charge to consumers is going to go up. Allocative efficiency will go down. Their sales are going to go down. And remember, by the way, it's at the elastic section demand. Therefore, the increase in the price is likely to result in a more than proportionate decrease in demand and thus lower revenue for the firms. Some of them might even end up shutting down, but we'll get to that in a second. Profits are going to go down, right? And then again, you could talk about, oh my God, some of these firms, they're going to shut down. It's bad, yeah? Solid, so solid, such a great analysis, yeah? Right, let's evaluate in terms of what, again, could potentially be evaluations here. One of the potential evaluations that I think works really well here is to question whether this is likely to be the case for all the industries across the economy. There are certain sectors in the economy that are probably more resilient. A good example of that is financial services. The PED, it's a good thing to talk about here. The PED for the UK's financial services is likely to be inelastic. And the reason why it's likely to be inelastic is because the UK, even with the tariff, is likely to continue to have a very strong comparative advantage in terms of the financial services sector compared to any European country. Yeah. The two kind of places in the world where there's really strong financial services are London and New York. Yeah. Frankfurt is miles behind London. Yeah. In other words, despite the fact that we've got this issue and the fact that there's obviously it's not easy to like free trade anymore, that may not affect the financial services sector as much, and therefore they may be okay. So that's, I think, a really solid eval. Other industries like fishing, for example, or like supermarkets, or I don't know, it will again guide you in the data. They may be way more effective. So that's one. Yeah. The other thing that I could have spoken about in terms of the kind of various impacts is it just may be temporary. Because, for example, the government might invest into education and training schemes that allow people to then develop skills to, I don't know, be a HGV driver, or they might provide extra generic, I don't know, like bonus schemes or healthcare. I don't know. Like I'm making up examples that may be in the data that may encourage more people to actually enter and do these jobs that were left vacant. That is our first analysis and our first evaluation in terms of micro. Let's deal with macro. So on a macro level, this is what I want our overarching point to be. The overarching point that I would do for this is that one macroeconomic effect of the UK's decision to leave the EU is lower living standards in the UK. Let's talk about why. There are a couple of reasons why. The first reason why living standards, so the overarching point is living standards on the floor, in the mud, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Okay. So first thing, the first reason why is that if you're a TNC, do you agree that you're like, what am I doing here? I've just lost access to like the biggest market and I don't have free trade. I can't bring over the most skilled laborers. I need to basically apply for like a visa, added cost, regulation. Such a nightmare now. So TNCs may start to leave. And if TNCs leave, not only does that create job losses, there's something else that occurs. So TNCs may start to leave. Yeah. Now, that in itself is a good point because you could talk about, oh, there's going to be job losses. The other thing that you could talk about here is the fact that actually, if you look at what happened straight after the Brexit referendum, and part of it is TNCs leaving, but it's also a lack of confidence in the UK economy. Actually, you know what? I'll show you what happened. The reason I'll show you what happened is the June 2018 paper. June 2018, paper 2, 25 marker. Watch this. Let's go look at it together. Gives me an opportunity to have some red ball. Right. A-level economics. Edexcel, paper 2. Here is June 2018. Fun. Let's have a look. And this, by the way, bear in mind, you can incorporate real world knowledge into your 25 markers. You'll get credited for your own knowledge. But of course, you don't need to spend a lot of time on that, if at all, because there is an extract, and the extract is literally based on the question. So the extract is going to be very helpful. Yeah? Okay, let's get to the 25 markers really quickly. 25 markers are as follows. If I can find it. There we go. Hello. It says this. It's the second question. The British pound fell by over 10% to a 30-year low against the US dollar after the UK voted to leave the European Union. Okay, let's talk about it. So now, typically, if I'm dealing with depreciation of a currency, I would often kind of talk about it as a good thing. I'll be, oh, you're more price competitive, exports are going to go up, and imports are going to. Now, because my overarching point is that it's bad, I'm saying living standards are going up, I'm talking about TNCs leaving. I want to do two things. The first, I want to illustrate why the pound is likely to have depreciated. We will later today in the session go through exchange rates because I think it's quite important to recognize that they can easily ask questions about that as well. But the way you'd work out exchange rates is through the foreign exchange market, whereby I've got the quantity of pounds on the x-axis. And then let's say this is the price of pounds in, let's say, dollars. Oh, we've just got simple supply and demand. Okay. As soon as the UK left the EU, that would have shaken consumer confidence. Oh, sorry, investor confidence. They'd have been like, what are you doing? Yeah, this is not a good idea. And therefore, there was a major sell-off of the pound. The major sell-off of the pound causes what to shift? Well, it shifts the supply curve outwards. So if I shift supply outwards, like this, S2, look at what happens to the pound. Well, it explains why the pound fell to a 30-year low. Okay, why is that relevant? How do I make that, the depreciation of the pound, a point that basically supports the idea that living standards are falling? Well, very easily. Because do you agree that British firms import their raw materials? They import large amounts of raw materials like their oil. And now suddenly, if the pound is weak, is it cheaper or more expensive for me to import? It's more expensive. And if it's more expensive for me to import my raw materials, I need you guys to recognize that that affects SRAS. Throw back to the A marker just a couple of weeks ago. But anyways, right, so let's draw it. What happens? Well, the SRAS curve is going to shift inwards. British firms import a lot of their raw materials. Yeah, we're not blessed with many raw materials in the UK. So we have real GDP over here, price level over here. And here we go. SRAS, 1, AD, 1, okay. Y1, P1. What would you say happened? Well, we said that the exchange rate depreciating causes SRAS to shift inwards because the cost of production for British firms is rising. Here we go. SRAS 2. Two problems. First problem. Number one is, can you see that there's inflation? But I don't want you guys to just say inflation. You're better than that. You will always tell me what type of inflation it is. It's either demand pull or cost push. Think about the name. Demand pull is the aggregate demand curve. Pull is the inflation. The cost push, it should really be called supply push, I guess, but or supply, supply push, yeah. But it's not called that. It's called cost push. This is clearly cost push. So you get cost push inflation. That's already bad. You also get a fall in economic growth. That is a problem. You can even describe this, if it's prolonged, that this is stagflation, where it's a combination of stagnant economic growth combined with higher levels of inflation, living standards in the UK as a byproduct of Brexit. Not so good. Yeah, that is outstanding analysis. Now, the only part of this essay that I don't feel as comfortable, that I don't feel like, I feel like the extract will probably be better. Just off the top of my head, these are the kind of evaluations that you might want to talk about. The first evaluation is that it might just be temporary. The negative implications of Brexit may just be in the short run, because in the long run, the UK can now negotiate trade deals with those outside the EU. They might be able to strike deals with the likes of Australia and Canada and India. I don't know, whatever. Yeah. And again, the extract might talk about this. And therefore, the pattern of trade may begin to shift away from basically selling goods into the EU or buying products from the EU towards countries outside the EU. So maybe actually, long run, not such a big deal. The other thing, well, this is changing on a honestly like minute by minute basis. So, but you can still say it, yeah. Is in the latest rounds of tariffs that the US have basically tried to implement, even though the courts are blocking it now. But anyways, like with the tariff placed on the UK was lower than the tariff placed on the EU. Come on, these little wins, yeah. So what does that mean? It means that actually we might find it easier, or we might have a kind of cost advantage when it comes to exporting our products into America compared to European firms. Yay. Yeah. The very final thing that you can maybe talk about as well is the fact that what's it called? There was actually a trade deal that just got struck between the UK and the EU, and maybe in the future the trade deal might actually be very close to free trade. In which case, again, in the long term, the impacts may not be that significant. Done. Easy. Trading blocks. Let's go. Let's do another question together. So I want to go and do. Let me just tick off my list of things. Tick tick. We did the 12 marker in Kenya. Okay, right. I want to go back to 12 markers because it is unusual for Edexcel to not give you a 12 marker either in paper 1 or paper 3. They actually, I don't think, did that last year. Hence, it's overdue this year. 12 markers where they explicitly state use a cost and revenue diagram. I will show you in a second. You guys need to understand that you just need to shift, obviously quote from the extract, shift whatever needs to shift, explain it, analysis done. You get 8 out of 8. You do not need to do 2 analyses, yeah? 1 analysis if you're basically dealing with a cost and revenue diagram shifted, yeah? I will show you guys an example of a question. Annoyingly, the question I'm going to show you was an 8 marker. We're going to pretend it's 12, yeah? And we're going to treat it as a 12 marker. So we're going to go to June 2018, paper 3. Let's go. What is this paper 3? Right, paper 3, June 2018. Let's open over here. Okay. Ta-da. Here we go. So the second question was about Indonesia, and I just want to guide you through this. Let's go quickly to the extract. Okay, here we go. And we are going to read little segments of the data in a second so that you can understand why what's happening is happening. So it says, examine the likely effects on the profitability of Indonesian rice farmers of the government's increased investment in dams. Use a cost and revenue diagram to support your answer. Right, hopefully this comes up, it's not an 8 marker. That'll be annoying if it's an 8 marker. Hopefully it's a 12. If it's a 12, because you should be getting 8 out of 8 in less than 8 minutes like that. Okay, first things first. Let's read just the last part of the extract. I obviously know where the data is relevant and not relevant, but I will guide you towards it. So right here we are. It says this. Infrastructure spending will help bring foreign investment and good jobs to Indonesia, as well as encouraging exports. Indonesia's infrastructure problem can be summed up as too few roads and congested ports. In the short term, infrastructure spending puts people to work and boosts demand for raw materials. In the longer term, this spending offers the chance to make up for decades of neglect and underinvestment. Indonesia has plans for 65 dams, 16 of which are already under construction. In 2015, work started on the Uriato Dam, designed to boost agricultural productivity in Aceh. Recently, fields were flooded for the massive Jatigede Dam in West Java. We're going to pretend my pronunciations are really on point here. After 20 years of delays. Once complete, the dam will irrigate 90,000 hectares of rice paddy, increasing efficiency by giving farmers 2 harvests a year instead of 1. Okay, I chose this question on purpose, by the way. And if you're watching this back later, it's a very good idea to pause it, see what you draw, and compare it to actually what it should have been, yeah? Part of the reason why is because often people are like, oh my God, what if I don't understand the data? Right, do you think I know what irrigate means? Do I look like I'm a geography nerd? No, I don't know what irrigate means, but I can probably infer meaning, yeah? And the main point is that it increases efficiency and it's going to result in them having 2 harvests a year instead of 1. Okay. Now, when I set this as a question for my students, I often get 2 answers, both of which I would argue are incorrect. And the mark scheme is very flexible. It probably will allow it, but let me explain why I don't think they are correct. The first thing that people do is they shift demand out. Well, why is demand shifting? Like AR and MR, why would it shift? It's not that there's suddenly an increase in demand for rice. People don't just wake up and go, oh my God, there's a dam. Wow, God damn, I need rice, right? Obviously not. No. So it's not AR and MR. Nor, I would argue, is it a one-off fixed cost. Now that they probably will accept. But can I explain why it is not a fixed cost? The logic of why is as follows. So let me just share my screen again in terms of the board. And let's work it out. I know that we need to draw a cost and revenue diagram, and I would not do this. I'm just going to basically draw a supply and demand diagram for us to work out what needs to happen. So here's price, here's quantity. Supply, demand. Right. Based on what we just read, what would shift? The whole point of a dam is that it can prevent flooding. And if it prevents flooding, it allows you to basically produce more rice. Hence why the number of harvests are going to double. They're going to increase. What's shifting? It's not demand, it's supply. Supply is shifting which way? Outwards. Supply, like there. Yeah, so this is S2. This is Q2, P2. Okay, recognize a couple of things. The first thing you should recognize is 1. Do you see the price being charged to consumers for rice is going to go down? And do you notice the number 2, quantity is going to go up? Now, if I had shifted my AC curve as a fixed cost and just did AC by itself, 2 things would have happened. Output wouldn't have changed and price wouldn't have changed. That doesn't make sense because it says clearly in the data that it's going to double the amount of harvest they can basically produce. Therefore, the only correct answer is MC and AC were falling. Your variable costs are decreasing and you're going to draw it. You start off, by the way, by starting off with one likely impact of the investment into dams is higher profits for rice farmers. Yeah. You give me a quote from the extract, how it will irrigate 90,000 hectares of paddy and whatever, right? Doubles the amount of produce that they can make. Yeah. So there's that. Then you draw your diagram. And the diagram is not this. This is me just explaining why the diagram will look the way it does. I know we've probably drawn it already today, but let's just really quickly redraw it. Just to show you how quickly you can draw these things. So quantity / revenue. Let's go. MC1. AR equals D. You guys can draw it neater than I am. AR equals D. MR, half the slope. MR, this is profit maximization. This is Q1. We go up. This is the price, P1. That's cost, AC1. Right, C1, A, B. Right, we just said that the variable costs are going down. So MC is going to fall like that. I mean, that is the worst MC curve that any human has probably ever drawn. I apologize. I'm doing it as quickly as possible. And then we go up to get the demand curve. Notice, by the way, that what I just showed you a second ago with supply and demand has happened now. Yeah? Do you understand? The price has gone down and the output has gone up. The last thing is the cost. Somewhere over there, AC2. Yeah? Q2 hits AC2 there. That's C2. That's D. That's E. Beautiful. Right. That's it. All we have to do is that. We have to basically shift the diagram, explain what the shift is, explain that basically they're more efficient. Therefore, variable costs are going to be falling. MC and AC fall. Draw it. Talk about profits. You don't even need to. I would quickly, just to give it a bit of depth, but you don't need to. Explain that prices are falling, output is rising. But the most important thing is profits are rising from area P1 ABC1 to P2 DEC2. Why? Because that was what the question was about. The question was about profitability. Okay, let's evaluate. Can I just guide you guys through some generic evaluations that will always work? Whenever your analysis is saying profits are rising, give me evaluations as to why maybe their profits are not rising. So even if this cost has gone down, another cost may have gone up. Yeah, look for stuff like that. If profits are falling, opposite. You could talk about, oh, actually, maybe profits don't rise because of the PED, or it could not rise, or it may not fall because of they can, I don't know, something else. I'll show you guys examples from past papers in a second. But firstly, in the extract, now I didn't read this section of the extract for you guys, but I want to show you. One of the things I could draw your attention to is this. The government has used savings from cutting fuel subsidies. Okay, if the government cut fuel subsidies, what does that do to the price of fuel? It's likely to increase the price of fuel. Do you guys agree that fuel for farmers is a variable cost? And therefore, even though they're getting a dam, which will help them basically in terms of flooding and efficiency and stuff like that, maybe other costs are rising, like this. And therefore, it may not be that beneficial to them. Their cost, it might cancel out. Their cost might actually be going up. Clear? The other thing you could talk about, by the way, is whenever it comes to infrastructure, time lag. Majorly time lag. It's going to take a long time for them to actually build it. It says it in the data, by the way. If you were listening to what I was reading earlier, it's 20 years of delays. Like what? In other words, this is not going to affect profitability for a long, long, long time. Yeah. Other things I could talk about is that, okay, it might prevent flooding, but it can't prevent like a drought. Yeah. So there's other things that could happen that could cause the amount of rice to basically be, to produce to go down. Blah, 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 blah. You get the gist. Yeah. June 2017, paper 3, question 2C is about the introduction of the living wage. Let me just whiz through a couple of these questions for you guys. Yeah. Right. So the introduction of the living wage, what would I do? It's a cost and revenue diagram again. Variable costs for the firms are obviously going to go up because they have to pay their workers a higher salary. MC and AC rise, describe the diagram, done. Analysis. My eval, do you know why their profits may not have gone down? Well, one is said the living wage is applicable to people above the age of 25. I can just go and get younger workers who are not subject to the living wage, and therefore my costs don't go up. And the skills required to do those jobs, not particularly high. Can I train up younger workers to do the jobs? Yes, I can. They can brew coffee. That's the evaluation. Alternatively, when wages go up, do you know what else goes up? Productivity goes up. The opportunity cost of losing your job is now greater. And as a result, efficiency goes up. That could offset the increase in the cost. My point is that if I've said profits are falling in the analysis, my eval is to kind of question whether that will happen and say why actually profits may be unaffected. June 2018, we just did. June 2019, paper 1, 6D, 12 marker. It was about BT's profits going up. What was the reason? Well, basically their profits were rising because they were merging with EE. Merger causes AR and MR to shift outwards. Shift it, draw it, summarize it. Eval, okay, can you tell me bad things about a merger that might mean profits don't go up? Number one, they might experience diseconomies of scale. The firm becomes so big that actually managing it and keeping costs low might be hard. It might result in cultural clashes between the two firms that leads to them breaking up and there being a demerger. Easy? Hence, profits may not necessarily go up. The CMA might scrutinize everything they do so much, they can place things like profit caps, or they can place things like price caps, whatever. The point is simply to illustrate, hey, it's not necessarily going to go up. June 2022, paper 1, question 6D. It was again, cost and revenue diagram, this time about why profits were falling, well, costs were rising, for coffee shops. Do you know what that question was, by the way? If you read the extract, it was identical to June 2017, paper 3, question 2C. It was about how the living wage was being kicked in, 6.2% increase in the national minimum wage for people above the age of 25. That's the living wage. Therefore, the answer I gave you a second ago is identical again there. You just go, oh, variable costs go up, MC and AC go up. Well, they could switch to younger workers. They are able to basically, productivity levels are going to go up, etc., etc. Get the gist? 12 marker. If it comes up on cost and revenue, I expect all of you to get 12 out of 12. Let's go. Let's do another topic that I have on a list of things to do. Okay, right. You know what? Let's go back to the Kenya question and do the 25 marker in that particular question. And then I'll reverse the question as well to do the other side as well. So let's 2022. Oh, there we go. Live. Okay. I always think when it comes to the 25 markers, by the way, for paper 3, that there is a correct and incorrect option. Sometimes they're both really nice. This is an instance where they're both lovely. These are two nice 25 markers. Between effect questions and factor questions, I always think effect is the right choice. Impact as well is like similar to effect, but factor questions are really awkward, especially to evaluate. Yeah. So, sorry, 1 second. I need to just do this silly thing for TikTok to not go off. It's like a puzzle thing that I need to move. Right. Anyways, so the point is that there's always usually an effect. I mean, up to date to now, they've always asked one question that's effects. You guys might be unlucky enough that you might be the first year ever that has factors. Who knows? We'll find out next week. But the point is that of these two questions, they are both great. So what I would do is I would quickly in my mind plan and think about which one I can do really detailed analyses, both for micro and macro comfortably. And the answer, in my opinion, is D. Even though E is great as well. E is a great question as well, but D is such a nice question. Yeah. Evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of decreasing interest rates in Kenya or another developing country over your choice. Personally, I would stick to Kenya because I have data to support me. Let's go through it. If I now sit down in the exam and I start planning, okay, interest rates have gone down. Well, interest rates are clearly a macro topic, right? It's basically monetary policy. And you should know that whenever you get questions about monetary policy, you should always be dealing with it in terms of what's called the transmission mechanism. Fancy way of saying, has the candidate gone through the components of aggregate demand and explained what's happened to the various components of AD? So let's lay out the components of AD. AD is equal to consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports. Agree? And let's whiz through what happens to each of these. And then in a moment, we're going to choose which one we're going to do for micro and which one we're going to do for macro, partly based on what we're going to evaluate with as well. Okay. On a micro, sorry, on a kind of one step at a time basis, let's start with consumption. When interest rates are low, are people in Kenya going to save or not save? Well, the answer is that when interest rates are low, there is less incentive to save your money in the bank because the amount that you get in return is not very attractive. So savings are going to go down and consumption is going to go up. So consumption, we know, goes up. Investment. Okay, if interest rates are low, are firms going to borrow more money or less money? Well, they're going to borrow less money, sorry, more money, because it's cheap to borrow it back, to pay it back. Therefore, they're going to take out more loans and the investment is going to go up. Now, government spending is fiscal policy. You can completely ignore government spending when it comes to monetary policy in terms of analysis. We pretend not even there. And then that leads us into exports minus imports. Okay, what happens to exports minus imports? Now, macro, I always talk about there being like a trigger point, where if I just gave you the first chain of reasoning, you should be able to then flesh it out and go, oh, I could do this, I could do that, I could do this. Well, the trigger point always, when it comes to interest rates and the effect it has on the current account, is hot money. I need you guys to understand what hot money is. Hot money is investors around the world are constantly moving their money between countries based on wherever interest rates are highest. If I'm a multimillionaire, I want to park my money in the bank account that gives me the best rate of return. Agreed? In other words, is hot money going to flow into the UK, or Kenya in this case, sorry, or out of Kenya? Well, the answer is if interest rates are low in Kenya, why would I park my money in Kenya? I'd move my money somewhere else. Hot money, therefore, is going to flow out of Kenya. And this is going to be our macro point. So let's just walk through the logic together. Yeah. The overarching point is going to be economic growth is going to go up, but let me just go through why. The first thing we're going to talk about is the fact that if hot money flows out from a foreign exchange perspective, like exchange rate perspective, this is what it looks like. So if you don't know what the Kenyan currency is, you can just write Kenyan currency. It's called the shilling, but I don't think they provide that to you in the data. So it's okay. Just write price of Kenyan, a bit long, shilling in, let's say, dollars. Okay, and then we've got quantity of shilling. Okay, basic supply and demand. And when it comes to exchange rates, by the way, I always want you guys to just do supply and demand. Yeah, that is your go-to all the time. When it's like reasons for why the currency appreciated, depreciated, etc. Always, I want supply and demand. So I'm gonna go Q1, and that's P1. Okay, right. Well, if hot money is flowing out, what does that mean? What it basically means is people who have their money parked in Kenya decide, you know what, now I'm going to move it. I'm going to put it into, let's say, the American banking system or the British banking system or wherever. It doesn't matter where it's going. Yeah. Okay. So what does that mean? What that means is that they are selling Kenyan shillings in the foreign exchange market to be able to buy pounds. On that diagram, what shifts? Well, the correct answer, if there are more sellers of the shilling, supply shifts outwards. Does this. Okay. So if we draw that, and I would draw this, by the way, as part of the analysis, what does that do to the shilling? Do you guys agree that the shilling has just depreciated? Yeah? The shilling has now depreciated and we now open up another chain of reasoning. And the other chain of reasoning now is to constantly remember when it comes to exports and imports, when it comes to your current account, your trade deficit or current account deficit, it means the same thing. I need you guys to always remember two countries. There are two countries that I need you to remember. Number one is China and number two is Germany. Why do people buy Chinese goods? Well, China are cheaper. Therefore, they are what we call price competitive. Germany are not cheap, but their products are high quality, like German cars. Therefore, they are quality competitive. It's always that. We're constantly just talking about price competitive or quality. If I get a question about how to improve competitiveness, I just need to either reduce my prices or I need to basically improve my quality. Simple. Yeah. So by the way, that question I'd answer it completely with supply side policies. But anyways, whatever. Yeah. So the point is that if the Kenyan shilling is just depreciated, does the Kenyan economy become more or less price competitive? Well, the answer is they become more price competitive. And if they become more price competitive, what will happen to the exports? Well, exports out of Kenya are now going to go up. Now, this is where easily you can incorporate data into your answer. What can they export more of? Cut flowers, obviously. Yeah. They can export more cut flowers. And also send the extract, by the way, that their biggest export is tea. They can now export more tea and cut flowers. Do you know why? And you justify why. Because other currencies like the US dollar can now buy more Kenyan shillings. At the same time, imports are likely to go up or down? Down. Why? Because the Kenyan shilling is now weak. It doesn't buy as much in the global market. If exports are rising and imports are falling, the Kenyan current account is improving. Already, by the way, that is phenomenal. You're running out of time. That is enough. That's very detailed. That's a lot of depth. You'll get a lot of marks. It's solid. But if you've got the time, you can now say the following. X minus M is also a component of AD. Therefore, AD is going to shift outwards. Exports are also a injection into the circular flow of income. And so there's likely to be a positive multiplier effect. Bonus point, by the way, is developing economies like Kenya, the multiplier is massive because they have a high marginal propensity to consume. You probably don't have enough time to write that in an exam, but know that that's valid. That's amazing. Yeah. Marginal propensity to consume high means multiplier is massive. You now draw again LRAS, AD, shift it twice, summarize the diagram. Economic growth, you're flying. You're actually flying at this point. That is your analysis. And there's a reason why I did this. There is a reason why I chose that as my analysis rather than consumption and investment. Even though consumption and investment, by the way, are solid, they're valid, they would get you loads of marks. I chose it because of one reason. If you haven't watched this video, I cannot emphasize the importance of watching this video later. Every single time you are dealing with the exchange rate and the impact of the exchange rate on the current account, I obligate you to evaluate with Marshall Lerner and J-curve, always. I want that always. That is really high level eval. I'm going to quickly just whiz through the theory as a bit of revision for those of you that are unclear on it. But really, you should watch that video because it hopefully explains it in a lot more detail. It runs through a mathematical example as well. In a nutshell, you'd go, however, for there to be an improvement in Kenya's current account, following the depreciation of the shilling, the Marshall-Lerner condition must be satisfied. This states, now, if you write that the sum of the price elasticities of imports and exports is greater, you'll get the mark. It's on the mark scheme. That's what they describe it as. Technically speaking, and I proved it in my video, it's the average sum, but whatever. Yeah, let's not kind of get into the semantics, but the average sum of the price elasticities of imports and exports must be greater than 1. In other words, they need to be elastic. Exports and imports need to be elastic. Really quickly in terms of the logic, really fast. The reason why is because imagine that you and I sell a shop. Yeah, imagine we sell a shop. We have a shop. We sell, as part of our shop, we sell these bottles of water. Okay, so here's our bottle of water. And I decide to tell you, I go, guys, we're going to reduce the price of the bottle of water. Okay, we reduce the price. What will happen to demand? So if I reduce the price, do you guys agree that obviously demand is going to go up? Duh. But is that enough information to work out whether we make more revenue or less revenue? No, it's not. Because what I need to know is the elasticity. That's the whole point of elasticity, is that I can go, oh, if the demand goes up, let's say we reduce the price by, I don't know, let's say 10%. Yeah. The demand only goes up by 1%. Do you guys agree that the price change, therefore, was bigger than the change in demand? Is my revenue increasing or decreasing there? Clearly, my revenue is going down. The exact same thing is true when your currency depreciates. When the shilling depreciates, of course, Kenyans are going to sell more in the global market, obviously, because their products are now more attractive, they're cheaper. However, if there's only a small increase in the demand for their products globally, they're not making more money. They're making less money. Their export revenue is falling, not rising. Is that really clear? The same is true, by the way, when it comes to imports. When my currency is weak, of course I can't import as much. So of course I'll reduce my imports. But if I only reduce my imports a tiny bit, I'm paying more for my imports compared to before. Yeah? Therefore, the current account would get worse. It would not get better. And every time you talk about the Marshall-Lerner condition, I want you to draw the J-curve. And it's going to look like this. So let's draw it together. On the x-axis, I've got time. On the y-axis, I've got the current account. This is positive. This is negative. Okay. If you're not sure, by the way, whether they are in like a surplus or a deficit, no problem. As long as obviously the data is not told you, then you should probably put it in the right place. If they're in a surplus, you'd be operating somewhere here, like positive, like Germany, China, South Korea, Japan, etc. Yeah. But a lot of countries are in a deficit. The USA, the UK, I think Kenya. I don't actually know, but let's assume that they are. Yeah. So what we do is this. We basically go, okay, so initially nothing will happen. Yeah. And then you are going to tell yourself, you're going to go, okay, whatever I said happens in the analysis, the opposite happens first. So if in the analysis I said the current account is going to get better to begin with, in the short run, your current account is going to get worse. And therefore it goes down and then it goes up. Yeah. And that is the exact moment in time, by the way, where the shilling has depreciated. So that's depreciation of shilling. Okay. If you didn't know what the currency was, write Kenyan currency. Okay. Why? What's the logic? Why is it that in the short run, the current account is getting worse rather than better? Well, the logic of why it's getting worse is because Kenyan firms are likely to be tied into trade contracts. And if they are tied into trade contracts, do you agree that exports and imports are inelastic? They are not likely to change very much. In other words, is the Marshall-Lerner condition satisfied? No, the Marshall-Lerner condition is not satisfied. Therefore, is the current account going to get better? No, the current account is going to get worse. In the long run, so there, for example, like onwards, yeah, these trade contracts can be renegotiated and provided martial lending condition is satisfied. Now the current account will begin to improve for Kenya. So this is like a glorified time lag point, but it's very good, especially because it's being combined with the martial learner condition. I want them together. Martial learner, J curve, yeah? Now, before I do the micro side of this essay, let's say we switch the question and it's now about the UK and about interest rates going up because they have been over the last year or so, yeah? So let's say it was like the impact on the economy of higher interest rates. My first analysis, obviously, is the opposite, is higher interest rates, hot money flows into the UK economy. Therefore, people will be demanding more pounds. You shift the demand for pounds outwards. That causes the pound to appreciate. Does that make the UK economy more price competitive or less price competitive? Less price competitive. Therefore, exports go down, justify why, imports go up, current account gets worse. What I would now draw is, I'd explain obviously Marshall Lerner and J curve, or the Marshall Lerner condition, sorry. Now, so if this was like an appreciation question, so just to be clear, and higher interest rate, I've reversed the question, yeah? So I'll come back to low interest rates in a second. So if I do current account over here, positive, negative, and let's say with the UK. Okay. Again, what happens now is the opposite. We just said in the analysis, the current account is going to get worse. Well, initially, it gets better. It does this, and it does that. Now, whether, by the way, if I lifted it all the way so it became positive, and then it doesn't make a difference, as long as the shape is correct. Initially, the current account for the UK would go up. So this is like when the currency would have appreciated. So appreciation of pound in my made-up example, yeah? Does that make sense? So the point is that you need to be able to draw that diagram and work out whether it's getting worse or better to begin with. It's just the opposite of what you said in the analysis to begin with. In the long run, it does what you said. Is that clear? Right. That's our macro side of the essay, and it is utterly phenomenal. Back to the Kenya question where interest rates are low. Do you remember I went through the components of AD and I said, hey, consumption is going to go up. Investment is going to go up. Now, how do I make that a macro point? I need you guys to recognize a few things. It is perfectly okay to build your entire micro point on the basis of macro as long as you bring it back to micro and vice versa. Okay. So my overarching point is going to be something like this. One microeconomic effect of low interest rates in Kenya is higher profits for Kenyan firms. Now, again, it's so easy to incorporate data. If you look at the data, and it doesn't have to be like overly sophisticated stuff. Like earlier when I talked about them exporting more cut flowers, like that wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't like, oh, wow, how did you think of that? It's just, I literally did a 12 marker on cut flowers. So I know that it's something to like mention. Look at the extract. The extract is about an absolute legend called Robert Matisco, or Matsiko. I butchered his name. Anyways, he basically owns a grain milling business in East. Let's talk about his firm. Like, do you see me? Like, you talk about, oh, profits for Robert Matisco's grain milling business is going to go up. Go you. And this is why. The logic of why is the following. So let's just walk through it. So I start off with the overarching point is microeconomic effect is higher profits. Okay. I simply now say interest rates being low in Kenya disincentivizes Kenyans from saving their money in the bank as the rate of return is unattractive. So therefore, savings are going to go down. So savings go down. So consumption will go up. Yeah. Okay. The second thing is that when interest rates are low, there is more incentive or it's cheaper for you to borrow money. Do you guys know how a credit card works? A credit card is you borrowing money, paying for whatever you need to pay for, and then paying that back plus interest at the end of the month. Now, if interest rates are low, are you going to use a credit card more often or less often? Well, obviously, you're going to use it more often because it's cheaper to borrow, right? So when you talk about its cost of borrowing, it's going down. Again, consumption is going to go up, right? That's enough. That's enough to basically explain, okay, if consumption is rising, what does that mean on a cost and revenue diagram? Well, if more people are spending in the economy, do you agree that there's more demand for my goods and services? Is that fair? And therefore, we are in dreamland again because we're going to draw AR and MR shifting outwards. Yay. Let's draw it together, right? And I want to draw your attention to a few extra bonus points that you could throw in whenever you shift AR and MR outwards. Because this is actually, I think, the first time in this live that I've shifted AR and MR outwards. I've done a lot of cost and revenue cost shifting. All right, so here we go. Step by step, MR. Now, by the way, if you know AR and MR are going to shift outwards, a very useful thing for you guys to remember is do not start too high up on the y-axis when you're going to draw your initial AR and MR, because obviously you're going to give yourself a bit of space to be able to shift it from a higher point. Yeah, so I'm going to do it somewhere over here. So this is AR1 equals D1. This is MR1. This is profit maximization. This is Q1. Go up. That's P1. Okay. And here we go. You see that is one of the most disgusting AC curves. I apologize. it will do then. A, B. Okay, not an art exam. Okay, right. We said AR and MR shifting outwards, yeah? Okay, what we're going to do is we'll shift it outwards like so. I'm going to just do it parallel. That's AR2 equals D2. And this is MR2, something like that. Okay, profit maximization occurs where MC equals MR, which happens to be here now. That's Q2. The new price is I go up until I hit the demand curve. So that's the price, P2. And finally, go up from Q2 until you hit the AC curve. My cost has gone down a little bit. C2, D, E. Okay, right. Let's just walk through this diagram together, yeah? So there's a few things that you can easily talk about. The first thing is that the price that Robert Matsuko can charge for his grain milling business will rise from Q1 to P2. His sales will rise from Q1 to Q2. Now, I was hoping it would happen, and it did. And the way I made it happen, by the way, is you see when I'm going to dotting up from Q1, when I draw my AC curve, I kind of make it so it's not too flat. I don't want your AC curve to be too flat so that this will happen when AR and MR shift outwards. Do you notice that the cost has gone down? Why? What happened? What can I now talk about? If you're very sharp, you got this. If you're very sharp, economies of scale. He, by selling more of his milling thing, I don't know what that means, right? Well, whatever the product is, yeah? Do you agree that he is in a better place to be able to tap into larger economies of scale? Give me an example. That opens a whole chain of reasoning, by the way, yeah? What's the chain of reasoning? Well, economies of scale are like purchasing economies of scale. He can bulk buy raw materials. Now, if you don't know what the raw materials are, say raw materials, it's fine. If you know what the raw materials are, tell me what the raw materials are and apply it, yeah? But the point is simple. The point is to go, hey, look, costs have gone down from C1 to C2 because by selling more output, this enables him to tap into larger economies of scale. And if he's tapping into larger economies of scale, and you give the example of that, by the way, what you can now also say is that he's operating closer to his MES. Bang. If he's closer to his MES, he's more productively efficient. Good for him. And finally, we bring it back. We bring it back to profits. P1, ABC1 to P2, DEC2. Easy peasy. What can he do with the profits? He can basically invest it into new technology. Give me an example of what he could invest it into. If you're not sure, just say new technology like new machinery. Like whatever, yeah? And then finally, what does that mean? It means dynamic efficiency has gone up. That is outstanding analysis, yeah? I'm gonna just take a sip of water, bear with me. Okay, let's evaluate. Right, it is very important to understand something. You do not need to evaluate your micro point with micro. You do not need to evaluate your macro point with macro. Normally you will, but it's completely fine if you don't. As long as you satisfy the condition of the 25 marker that you have a detailed analysis on micro, a detailed analysis on macro, you're good, yeah? So I am going to make it micro, but in the end, it's like a pretty big macro point. One of the things you can always talk about whenever we're dealing with interest rates going down, but it only works when it's going down. I'll give you guys the alternative valuation if interest rates are rising. But if we're dealing with interest rates going down, is to say that there is no guarantee the commercial banks are going to actually cut their interest rates. Just to give you some real world context that I'm not going to use for this essay, there's actually an application. If I rewind to the year 2009, in the year 2009, the Bank of England cut the UK base rate from 5.5% down to a then record low in increments, but all the way down to 0.5%. Commercial banks were so scared because they had lost so much money, hardly adjusted their interest rates. The whole point then is that everything we had just said about, oh, people are going to basically borrow more money, they're going to spend more, they're going to save it, none of it happens. It doesn't happen. It only happens if the commercial banks actually cut their interest rates as well, yeah? And now if I show you in the data, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So if I just show you the extract, there's such a good quote. Wherever and whenever you can quote, please, yeah? This is why, by the way, just really quickly before I actually get you guys to draw your attention to it, when you walk into the exam on Thursday, what I want you to do is take two color highlighters with you guys. Let's have a quick conversation about this. So two color highlighters. One is going to be your 12 marker highlighter. One is going to be your 25 marker highlighter. Yeah. I absolutely forbid you, obviously there's nobody going to be checking this, but I forbid you from looking at question number 2. Just look at question number 1. Because if you go to the second half of the paper and look at the second question, subconsciously, part of your mind is thinking about that question. Just leave it. You'll get there eventually. Halfway through the exam, you're going to switch over. Yeah. Look at the first question. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to the page that has all the questions on it. And I want you to instantly read the 225 markers and the 12 marker. You should know the 12 marker, what topic it is. So clearly here, absolute advantage, clearly. Yeah. And then you're going to choose which 25 marker you're going to do. Yeah. And the reason why you're going to choose is because then when you're reading the extract, you are highlighting relevant bits of information that you're going to then use as application or potentially use as application for that question. Does that make sense? So because I know I'm going to do interest rates, if I'm doing this answer, I already have a highlighter ready. And obviously the extract about interest rates is going to be where most of my data is going to derive from anyway. But here we go. It's here. Kenya's central bank rate has fallen from over 20% to 7% in the last decade. But the rates charged to small businesses and individuals are much higher than the central bank interest rate. That is exactly my point. That's my point. It literally says it for me. Now, even if it didn't say it, by the way, that would work. It's valid, it's entirely correct, and you can use it. Does that make sense? You can basically say, hey, guys, the fact that they actually may not pass it on means that consumption might not go up. AR and MR might not shift out. That is excellent evaluation. Profitability for the firms, therefore, may not go up. Clear-ish, hopefully? Yeah? Okay, that evaluation, that doesn't work if interest rates are rising, though. Because if the base rate is being raised, obviously commercial banks can raise their interest rates. Like, duh, they're obviously going to do that, yeah? So what would we do in that instance? Remember, by the way, if I rewind, if I kind of rewind a little bit. So if interest rates were high, people would have been saving more, consuming less, and so AR and MR would have shifted inwards in that micro analysis. And so we're like, oh, profits are going to go down. It's a disaster. Some of the firms might even shut down. Really clever evaluation is it depends on PED. Certain products, there's really strong brand loyalty. Certain products are essentials, they're necessities, etc. Therefore, realistically, people will continue buying them. That they will sacrifice other things. They will sacrifice other products, but not that. And therefore, actually, profitability may not go down. 25 out of 25. Let's go. Interest rates, done. Tick. What's next on my list? Right. Hopefully, we'll get through as much as we possibly can. Next thing I need to do is drink some Red Bull. That's what I need to do. Right. Let's see. Right. Are you ready? Let's have a quick chat. I promise I don't know. I never know. I have no idea what comes up, and I'm always as surprised as you guys in terms of what comes up in the paper. However, one of the things that I think Edexcel do, whether they mean to or don't mean to, is they give hints the year before about what could come up. Example, I told a lot of my students, and I did it in my live stream on paper one. Again, this is not a prediction. I just don't believe in predicting. I think you should be prepared for everything that can come up. But I said to them that last year, the 12 marker was about whether the CMA should be worried about the prospect of a merger. And I thought that was them setting you up for a big merger question, whether it was a B15 or a 25 marker. It obviously was a 15 marker this year. Yeah. In the 2022 paper, in section A, they had a little piece of data. In fact, I will show you very, very quickly just to see. I mean, this is all speculative and I could be absolute nonsense. Yeah. But in the 2022 paper, if we look at paper one, I want to show you guys something. So here's paper one. Here's 2022. Watch this. Very early on in the paper, they have, in fact, it was number one. There we go. Disney Plus is a streaming service, blah, blah, blah. It's basically data about streaming services, yeah? Okay. The very next year, look at the extract in the data response. Extract in the data response, what's it about? Oh, UK streaming services. Interesting, yeah? Now, this is honestly, like, I don't know. But the reason why I wanted to draw your attention to this is because last year, there was a full marker that a lot of people found challenging. And that full marker was in paper two. It was about market rigging amongst banks. Market rigging is basically that the banks were working together to set interest rates high, like something called LIBOR. They lend to each other. Now, you don't need to know the ins and outs. The only thing that I do need you to understand is what market rigging is and how that could potentially be examined. This is the 12 marker that I want us to prepare. The 12 marker says the following. Assess reasons why market rigging was possible amongst the banks. 12 marks. So the financial sector, by the way, there are two parts to it. One is the role of financial sector, which is pretty straightforward. Like they facilitate savings, they facilitate lending, they facilitate the exchange of goods and services, forward markets, equities, etc. Yeah. The other thing they can examine you on is market failure in the labor market, and that is under-examined in Edexcel up to now. Yeah. 2019 is the last time they examined this on a meaningful scale. It was a 50 marker for paper two. Yeah. Anyways, right. How do we deal with this? What does it mean? What is market rigging? Market rigging is collusion. It's where the firms are working together to basically set an artificially high, in this case, interest rate. Yeah. How do they do it? If you get a question about collusion, and I think I did this in the paper one stream or either this year or last year, I don't know, it's all a blur to me now, but whatever. There are two things that I need you to flag up as part of the analysis, and it will always be the case. Collusion is where firms work together to fix an artificially high price, often by restricting output and behaving as if they are a monopoly. And there are two conditions. Number one, the first thing that must be the case is it needs to be an oligopoly. It's an oligopoly. Why does it need to be an oligopoly? The reason why it's an oligopoly or needs to be an oligopoly is because of the fact that it's far easier to coordinate when there's just a handful of big firms. All right, if I deal with the financial sector, how many banks are there? Only a few big banks, right? There's only a handful of massive, massive institutions like Barclays, Deutsche Bank. They'll give you data if this comes up. Yeah. So there's that, right? So number one is that it's easier to coordinate. Can, for example, hairdressers collude? Of course they can't because there's like thousands of them. So therefore, it's impossible to realistically like coordinate a collusive agreement. That's one. But the other thing is that if it's an oligopoly, they have enough of the market share. They have enough of the market supply that by restricting supply, it raises the price. Can I just show you guys on a diagram? You don't need to draw this, by the way, but if I draw very quickly price and quantity and supply and demand. Q1, P1. If I did this in terms of supermarkets, as an example, yeah? Okay, how many supermarkets are there in the UK? Like how many big chains? Tesco, Asda, and Sainsbury's alone make up over 2/3 of the market, or roughly about 2/3 of the market. Do you guys agree that if those three firms therefore restrict their supply for the entire industry is shifting inwards? So it's doing that. And what does that do to the market price? Well, it causes the market price to go up. Okay, so if we were dealing with the banks and why LIBOR happened all those years ago, yeah, why were they able to manipulate the interest rate? Well, of course, because they have enough influence over the market supply. The industry supply would therefore shift inwards. Right, that is really important to recognize and explain that, look, the reason why it may have been possible is that they operate within an oligopoly. And therefore, these big players are able to influence the supply of this product. And as a result, supply shifting inwards causes price to go up. That is our first analysis. Is that clear? Two, second condition. The PED needs to be inelastic. It has to be. Let me explain why. The reason why PED needs to be inelastic is because, and we'll explain why it is inelastic in a second, is if something is elastic in demand, it makes no sense for us to collude. If you and I are selling a product and it's elastic and we raise our price, what would happen? So price goes up, well, demand obviously goes down. But if it's elastic, that means the demand more than proportionally decreases. We make less revenue there. That doesn't make sense. In other words, it has to be inelastic. In the examples they have examined on this, by the way, in the past, there are two past papers that are relevant that you can do. One is the lock specimen paper. In the lock specimen paper, paper 3, 12 marker was the factors necessary for the success of a cartel. It was all about oil. Is oil inelastic? Well, yeah, it's inelastic. June 2015, Unit 3 had a question, number 9D, I believe, about why price fixing, which is collusion, cartels, yeah, was possible in the Chinese baby formula milk. Why? Because it was so inelastic. Do you know why? Because the Chinese formula milk killed off babies. So the foreign formula milk was crazy inelastic. Of course they could collude. Of course they colluded. And they did collude. Yeah. So the point then is, okay, if you think about it, if it comes to things like loans, if I'm a bank, so if I'm a business and I want to take out a massive loan, let's say like hundreds of thousands of pounds, I realistically can't get that loan from like friends and family. I'm going to go and get my loan from where? I'm going to basically get it from the bank. And therefore, is demand elastic or inelastic? The demand is inelastic. It is so inelastic. There's a lack of choice. You have no choice but to take out loans through the banks. Therefore, when the price goes up, it leads to a less than proportionate decrease in demand for those banks that are part of the cartel, and therefore their revenue goes up. It makes sense for them to form a cartel. It makes sense for them to collude. In terms of how they were doing it, by the way, so the little stem they gave you last year is they were going on like online chat rooms and like they had like fake names and fake profiles and whatever, and were like working together to fix a high interest rate. And I think they manipulated the exchange rate as well. Yeah. Anyways, that's the point. That is the two analysis, and that is phenomenal analysis. Let's evaluate. The go-to evaluation for a question about cartels, about collusion, and like market rigging and stuff like that is prisoner's dilemma. Always. I want you to understand that prisoner's dilemma is excellence. Yeah. Prisoner's dilemma is basically the idea that cartels tend to break down in the long run. There is always and will always be there the incentive to break out of an agreement and undercut the others. If Tesco engage in a cartel with Asda Sainsbury's, then there's always in the back of their mind that if I cut my prices and they keep their prices high, I'm going to benefit at their expense. A lot of their customers are going to come to me, and therefore I'm going to generate more revenue. Well, in this case, the two banks they basically mentioned in last year's paper, if I remember correctly, with Barclays and JP Morgan. So I'm going to use them as my kind of illustration of prisoner's dilemma on a payoff matrix. So I'm going to draw it out over here. So we're going to have Barclays over here, and this is JP Morgan, yeah, over here. So this is a high interest rate. I'm going to just be a bit lazy and write IR. Low interest rate over here, high IR. You can just write high price, by the way. That's fine. And low IR. Okay. You need your numbers to add up or make sense. What I mean by add up is that they have to basically show that Prisoner's Dilemma is happening, whereby the outcome of the game is not that they've maintained the collusive agreement of high interest rate. It needs to basically be that it ends up at low. Yeah. So I'm going to write over here revenue. I don't know, let's say millions of dollars. Yeah. Okay. Right. I think easy numbers to remember are as follows. So you can do something like 100, 100. So if they both basically collude and play high, they're both going to generate 100 million. Yeah. Now, whoever plays low, you need to understand, has to win because there has to be that incentive to undercut. So if Barclays are playing low, so by the way, bear in mind, the left number represents the utility or outcome for the left player. The right number is for the top player. Barclays need to win in this example. So they're going to go 150. And then JP Morgan are losing, they get 50. Okay, we flip the numbers on their head, the other side. So now Barclays are losing, they're getting 50. JP Morgan are winning, getting 150. The only number that I need you guys to understand how to work out is this one, is that you need to ensure that the number here, which is going to be the outcome of the game, for it to be the outcome of the game, it needs to be lower than what they would have got if they are colluding, but higher than what they would achieve if they got backstabbed, basically. So between 50 and 100, I'm going to do 75. Because then the outcome of the game, by the way, if you were to play this out, this would basically be the outcome, which is low interest, yeah? Now you can add one more thing to it. In real life, by the way, I can't remember which bank was the one that did it. I'm pretty sure it was one of the Swiss banks, maybe Credit Suisse or UBS. I don't know. It will probably tell you in the extract if this comes up. They snitched. They whistleblew. Why is there an incentive to be a whistleblower? What's the benefit of being a whistleblower? Because if you whistleblow, do you know what you get? You get immunity. Your rivals get huge fines. You don't get the fine, yeah? And therefore, you get competitive edge over them because you've got profits that you can now invest. Their profits are going down, yeah? Does that make sense? Alternatively, by the way, if we're dealing with a question about like, so that is sensational evaluation. That is so good that should get the 4 marks of evaluation, yeah? So the other things that you can talk about, or the kind of things that could be examined in terms of like regulation and intervention by the government, if I were drawing a cost and revenue diagram to show the effect of a one-off fine, so they got a humongous fine, like Barclays and JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank, and loads of them got heavy fines. Do you know what I would draw? I would draw the following. So just really quickly, let's draw this cost/revenue. So let's say it was a cost and revenue diagram question about the impact of a fine for the banks. It'll be something like this. So MR, that's P1, P1. Okay, right. So let's have them making supernormal profits to begin with. And this is C1, this is A, this is B. All right, a fine is a one-off. It's like a fixed cost. It's a one-off cost, yeah? You basically get given a lump sum amount, yeah? In which case now, AC is rising. It's just AC. It's a fixed cost. So I'm going to exaggerate mine a little bit just to make it a bit easier for everyone to see it. I'm going to make them make a loss. They don't have to have made a loss. Output stays the same, by the way, because MC still equals MR. And then you go up until you hit the AC curve. This is C2, this is D. And so can you see now I'm making a loss? Yeah, anyways, I just wanted to show you the effect of a fine in the event that questions are about like, regulation and like you were drawing a cost and revenue diagram. That would work really, really effectively. Yeah? Okay, right. Let's take a little break from here and do that. All right, what's on my list? Okay, going through the list with them quite well. Right, just 1 second. Let's deal with the elephant in the room. Protectionism. Let's deal with protectionism as a 25 marker in the following way. This 25 marker is going to say the following. Evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of an increase in protectionism in, let's say, the USA, yeah, or in the EU. I don't know, whatever, yeah? Let's deal with how to kind of construct a very effective micro and macro analysis, yeah? There's obviously, by the way, paper 3, more than any other paper, has such a range of points on the mark scheme. So please do not feel like just because I'm saying it, that it must be the point that you have to do. And if you've got a different point, if it's on the mark scheme, and as long as you're explaining it and developing it, you're good. Don't worry, yeah? But in a nutshell, these are the points that I think make your life a little bit easier. You need to understand that there are 3 types of protectionist policies. The first type of protectionist policy is obviously a tariff. Number 2 is a quota. A quota is a limit on the amount of units that you allow to come into your economy. And number 3 is domestic subsidies. That's the one I would do for micro, partly because it's a micro topic, but partly because of the fact that I think you can develop it really quickly and very easily. Yeah. So if I had a choice and it was just protectionism generally, it didn't specify like tariffs, what I would do is I would do subsidizing my domestic firms. Now, our overarching point is going to be one microeconomic effect of an increase in protectionism or the government imposing protectionist policies is higher profits for domestic firms. Now, some of you might be thinking in your head, oh, I'm going to draw supply and demand. We are not basic. We are not basic like that. Sorry, but like, no, I don't want a supply and demand diagram. That is for everyone else to do. We always do cost and revenue diagrams. But then we need to work it out. We need to work out what does it shift if there's a subsidy? And the way to work it out is to just quickly draw a supply and demand diagram in your head or like just on a scrap piece of paper. If I draw it really fast, you should know that a subsidy, based on the definition alone, is a grant given by the government to producers, which decreases their cost of production, resulting in lower prices and higher output. There's the clue. Supply is going to shift outwards. Do you guys agree that that causes the price to go down and the quantity to go up? Again, if I had shifted just the fixed cost and just AC, neither price changes nor does the output. Therefore, it must be variable. Yeah, we're dealing with a variable cost. MC and AC are going to go down. Right, I think I've drawn it about 10 times. Let me see if I can find it. Which diagram here is MC and AC falling? Yeah, there. Right, let's go back there. Right. Saving the effort of having to draw it again. Right, okay, anyways, right. What's our point? Our overarching point is profits are going up. And it's the same chain of reasoning that I've done already in this stream, is that you talk about how prices are going to go down. They're becoming more allocatively efficient. The output is going to go up. You can talk about them being at the elastic section of the demand curve, etc. Yeah, but anyways, the point is to basically explain profitability is going up. Yeah, easy. I could have done tariffs. I could have done quotas. They're all valid. That's fine. I think this is easy to develop, and therefore I want you to do this. Or no, I want to do this. You can do this. Yeah, is that clear? Right. The evaluation, I think it works really effectively here to speak about how actually, although their costs might be going down and although their prices might be going down in the domestic market, retaliation, that countries around the world may retaliate by imposing major tariffs or quotas on their products. A good example of this, by the way, is BYD. BYD are a Chinese electric car manufacturing firm. Their cars are very, very cheap. And the reason why, one of the reasons why, is they're heavily accused by the EU and the US of being subsidized by the Chinese state. And so what are they doing in retaliation? What they're doing in retaliation is they're imposing major tariffs on them. Okay. So you might sell more cars or your whatever this product is in your domestic market, good for you. But actually, if suddenly now you're facing enormous backlash, and now when you're exporting your goods into these countries, you're struggling because there's quotas, there's tariffs. They might be subsidizing their firms, right? The point is that actually demand for your products might start to go down. Your costs might go up, by the way, because of the fact that if there's a tariff, your variable costs are now going up. It offsets the subsidy, basically, yeah? Does that make sense? That is solid evaluation. Again, I know you might be like, oh, that's macro. It's okay. And I made it micro anyway, because I'm talking about the impact it has on the firm, but it's perfectly fine anyway, yeah? That's the first half of my essay. Let's deal with macro. On the macro side of things, the thing that I would draw their attention to, I think, I mean, there's loads of choices, yeah? Is the macroeconomic effects is that it can help to reduce the trade deficit, yeah? And the reason why it can help to reduce the trade deficit, I mean, you could do economic growth as well. You could do unemployment basically being protected. They're all fine, by the way. All of the things you know about protectionism work effectively here. So don't be limited to what I say. So what I could talk about is the fact that if I impose a quota, do you guys agree that if there's a quota, that limits the amount of imports that come in? If I place a tariff, and I'm going to draw the tariff diagram in a second, do you guys agree that that translates into the level of imports going down? If I subsidize my domestic firms, they become more globally competitive. Exports go up, imports go down. All of this to say that the current account is likely to get better. Does that make sense? Yeah? So the overarching point is the current account is going to improve. Now, I want to draw you guys the diagram that I think is an amazing diagram. And this diagram, by the way, I could have used it on a micro level. I could have used it on a macro level. It is technically a micro diagram within macro, but it doesn't matter. And that is the tariff diagram. So quantity over here, and this is the price over here. Yeah? Okay, we start off. Let's say the question was from the perspective of the USA. Yeah, so I'm going to do S, USA. So this is the supply in the US of this particular good. So I don't know, let's pretend it's electric cars. And this is the demand for the good. Or maybe steel. Steel's probably a better example. Say this is like the price of the supply of steel in the USA and the demand of steel. Okay, right. One thing I don't want you to do is you don't need to label the equilibrium. The reason why the equilibrium only applies if they were a closed economy where they had no trade whatsoever, which is really unrealistic. So therefore, Just ignore the equilibrium, yeah? The first thing you do is you set a world price always below the equilibrium. Yeah, I know it's an assumption. We accept the assumption. We have to draw it like this. And one of the assumptions as well is that firms in the market become price takers. The reason why they have to become price takers is the idea that imagine that you could get this product, so you can get steel from anywhere in the world, and the market price, whatever the market price, everyone has to sell it at that market price. I'm going to do this as WP1 over here. Yeah, I'm going to draw perfectly elastic supply curve, and that's world supply. Because of the fact that I can get this supply to me from anywhere in the world at that world price, yeah? Okay, I need you guys to actually understand these diagrams. I don't want it to just be memorized. I want there to actually be logic that you can work out in an exam. So let's work it out together. First things first, whenever you have a price, whatever the price is, you need to understand that you can determine how much is supplied and how much is demanded simply by going across from the price. So if I go across from WP1, do you guys agree that I hit domestic supply or the US supply there? That is Q1. Is that a high supply or is that a low supply? The answer is that it is a low supply. Why is it a low supply? Well, do you guys agree that a supply curve maps out at different price points how many units you're incentivized to produce, how many units you're willing to sell? Well, for American steel producers, they go, this is pretty rubbish. I ain't going to make much of this. Therefore, they only make a very small amount of output because the price for them is not very attractive. Demand, on the other hand, though, hits it all the way over here. Is demand high or low? Obviously, demand is high. Why is it high? The logic of why it's high is because the price is low. Consumers in America go, oh my God, steel, so cheap, yeah? And therefore, they're going to buy loads of it. Bear in mind, by the way, consumers here are probably firms. Yeah, I know that's a bit logical. Firms that use steel as part of their production process are the consumer here. They are the demand curve, yeah? Realistically, me and you aren't going to buy steel. I mean, you could, I guess, but like, why would you, yeah? Anyways, the point then is this. I'm just like plug in some made up numbers, yeah? Let's say this is like, I don't know, 30,000. So let's say thousands, yeah? And let's say this is 100,000. In other words, the amount that is being supplied of steel in the USA is 30,000, but the amount that is demanded of steel is 100,000. There's a discrepancy. There's a discrepancy between how much is supplied and demanded. Demand exceeds supply. Okay, if I'm in America, how do I get the good? How do I get it if I can't get it from the US producers? Well, do you guys agree that I'm going to basically be importing it? That is why the distance between these 2 points is the initial level of imports. Does that make sense? Because that is how much I need to bring from abroad because there's not enough of it being made in the USA. Does that make sense? The last thing is basically that the the government imposed a tax. The tariff, increases the world price to like here. So this is WS plus tariff, and that's WP2. Okay, again, we walk through the same thing, yeah? The first thing we do is we go, at that world price, what is the domestic supply? Do you guys agree the domestic supply is over here, Q3? Is that high or is that low? Well, do you agree that it's higher than it was before because it used to be Q1? How comes it's gone up? The logic of why it's gone up is because of the fact that firms in America don't pay the tax. But because everyone is now charging a higher price for steel, they can now charge a higher price for steel. There is more incentive to produce steel. And therefore, there's an extension along supply from Q1 to Q3. Can you guys see that? It goes up like that. Domestic demand, on the other hand, goes down from Q2 to Q4. There's a contraction. Why? Easy peasy, consumers can't afford to buy as much. It's expensive. Therefore, the imports are now here, M2. Okay? Now, I can go through A, B, C, D, and I'm going to just quickly whiz through the revision. Like I have done this in a previous stream, and it's on our YouTube video for protectionism and tariffs. But the great thing about this diagram is that you can use this as both analysis and evaluation, and we will here. Because you know how our overarching point is the current account is going to get better? Well, I draw this, and I would show that, hey, look, imports have gone down from M1 to M2, and therefore the current account is improving. Yay, yeah? The other thing, though, is I can now use it for eval. And the evaluation here is to basically talk about the bad things about tariffs. And the bad things is to focus on the effect it has on consumers. Why is it bad for consumers? It's really bad for consumers because consumer surplus is going down by area A, B, C, D. The good is now more expensive. Now, bear in mind, by the way, if this is steel, I could have actually done this as my eval for micro. Now that I plan it, I probably would potentially move this into the micro and do retaliation for the macro here. It doesn't matter. It works, yeah? But anyways, the reason why is because if I'm talking about something like steel, do you guys agree that steel is a factor of production for firms? And if their costs are rising, It's called imported inflation, but can I show you why? If I now find it more expensive to import the steel to manufacture my cars or manufacture whatever it is I'm manufacturing, do you know what's shifting now? We shifted it earlier today, SRIS. So price level. Okay, and we go like this, SRAS 1, AD 1, that's Y1, P1, SRAS shifts inwards. What'd you get? You get cost push inflation. What happens to living standards in America? Living standards going down. Make sense? That's excellent. That is really, really strong evaluation, by the way. That is outstanding essay now. So hopefully that's kind of making it a bit clearer. Now, again, please don't go into this with like a rigid answer, because sometimes they can be very specific about what they want you to talk about. That leads me nicely into a very important conversation. Yeah. A really important question I want to show you guys is, or I'm going to show you a choice and see which ones you guys are going to choose. So we're going to go to the year 2022. Okay, so it's open here somewhere. I think it's this one. Yeah, it's this one. Okay. Good. Here is the two 25 markers. Right, while I just breathe a little bit, have a look and then choose which of the two you would have done in the exam. Right, wash my face as well to like wake up a little bit, because I am shattered, but the show, it must go on. Right, let's chat. Now, if the first question was just about the depreciation of the pound and that was it, I'd have definitely chosen that. That would have been my choice 100%, because I could talk about the impact it has on the current account, your price comparative, I do marginal learner, J-curve, happy days. I would have loved that as a 25 marker. The problem with that 25 marker, though, is what they basically limit you to. They limit you, refer to restaurants or other food delivery services in your answer. So if I'm going to talk about exports, how stupid is it if I start talking about, oh, we're going to export more Deliveroo? How? Are we going to import? Like, it doesn't make sense. Therefore, it doesn't make sense to do that one, in my opinion. Now, there is a way of doing exports and imports that I'm going to quickly talk about in the event that you have this come up. Can I quickly explain what you could do? One of the things about your currency being weak is that your currency being weak makes your country a more attractive destination for tourists. And if tourists come to your economy and spend their money, do you know what that counts as for you? It's an export. If I go on holiday, so if I go to, let's say, Spain, and I buy products in Spain, do you know what that is? That is essentially an import. The reason why is because if I actually physically imported something from Spain, well, I send money into the Spanish economy and the good comes from Spain to me. If I physically go to Spain and I pick up the good, it's like click and collect. It's an import for the UK. It's an export for Spain. In other words, I could have gone down the route of saying, hey, look, if the currency is weak, the tourism sector is benefiting. And as a result, because of people coming, they're going to be going to restaurants. They're going to be spending their money in restaurants. That's export earnings. And so I can go down that route. But that's still not amazing. And partly because also then the evaluation of martial learner Jacob doesn't work. Because it's not like the tourists are tied into a trade contract. You can't be like, oh, you can only buy this many, like, you can only order delivery 3 times. Doesn't work. That was the trick question. And that was the question that a lot of people would have gone and done terribly on, because they would have gone down the route of just ignoring what the question in the context was about and answering based on what they wanted it to be about. The correct answer was, by the way, the minimum wage, yeah? And that's what I want to go through. Let's go through it together. How do I basically do micro and macroeconomic effects of significant increases in the minimum wage? Let's do it. Right, let's go. I think the micro point is easy. So let's begin with the micro point, because I want you to essentially start off with your stronger point. Start with your strong foot and remember that you lead with that. So I think that the overarching point is profitability for firms are going to go down. Yeah. Why? Because if they're having to now pay a higher minimum wage, what that will do is it will result in variable costs going up, MC and AC go up. You draw the diagram, you shift it, and then profitability goes down. You can even develop it by talking about, oh, actually, some firms who are kind of labor intensive, so I should really do my charger. Labor intensive firms may actually shut down because of the fact that they need to basically pay these workers a higher salary, blah, 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 blah. Right, 2 things. 1, the evaluation, one of 2 things, potentially both things if you've got the time. The very first thing that you could talk about is that whenever wages are rising, productivity is also likely to rise. It's almost always the case. And the reason why is because of the fact that the opportunity cost of losing your job is now greater. And so you're more worried about losing your job, you're more likely to hit targets. If you are, for example, let's say in it's a cafe or a restaurant, because I think it was about restaurants, wasn't it? Yeah. So let's say you're in a restaurant you're more likely to turn up on time. You're more likely to be like really pleasant to the guests and do your job better because you're worried about the prospect of losing your job. Make sense? Therefore, productivity rising, by the way, causes variable cost to go down. It may offset the increase in cost as a result of wages rising. Cool. I could alternatively have done, if the chapter was talking about the national living wage, well, I already spoke about this earlier today, is that you can switch to younger workers. Go and get younger workers to do these jobs because younger workers can easily be trained up and they're not subject to the living wage. Therefore, your profits may not be affected. That is micro. Let's do macro. On a macro level, there's a lot of choice. I think personally, the one that I would do though, is that it's going to protect workers and therefore reduce income inequality because I can draw a Lorenz curve. Before I draw the Lorenz curve, though, I want to show you guys a great way to kind of develop the point in a clever way. And again, to use the extract. So what we're saying is that we go, okay, look, it's going to help reduce income inequality because it helps to protect the most vulnerable workers who are obviously being paid like, the lowest wages. And in particular, if they are employed by a monopsony employer, they are really vulnerable to very low wages. And you know what's a great example of that? This is a great example of that, the extract. Why? Because if you look at figure 1, it shows the food delivery industry. Look at the food delivery industry. By the way, I don't know about you guys. I was surprised by this. I didn't realize Just Eat was this big. I thought it was Deliveroo, but learn something new every day. This is all real world knowledge. But anyways, right. My point is this, is that if you look at the data, it shows that Just Eat have over 2/3 of the market, and then Deliveroo, those two alone are almost 90% of the market. Like it's absolutely dominated by them. If you are a delivery driver, do you agree that you have practically no choice but to work for one of these firms? In other words, they can exert an enormous amount of monopsony power over you and suppress your wages. And if they suppress your wages, that obviously is bad for your living standards, etc. Okay, let's reverse it now. The government imposing a minimum wage or raising it significantly means that those delivery drivers are now paid a better salary. Now they can afford basic necessities. They can afford things like, to heat their houses. There's a cost of living crisis in the UK right now. They are able to basically afford necessities like food and water and whatever. Again, like groceries have increased in price pretty dramatically over the last year or so, or like last 2 years. All of this to say that, hey, look, their living standards hopefully improve. This is good. If you really want to do, by the way, you could talk about national happiness as well. Probably wouldn't, but like you could talk about that here as well. Anyways, what I then would do is I would draw the following diagram. I would draw a Lorenz curve. And I basically explained that the Lorenz curve is going to shift based on the fact that inequality is going to decrease. So if I just draw the axes, and I want to show you guys ways of remembering what is on what axes for the Lorenz curve. So okay, so first things first. The Lorenz curve illustrates the level of inequality within the country, yeah? And so obviously the two variables that we're going to be considering are income and obviously population or households, yeah? There's a really easy way. In case diagrams are not your friend or you get confused and you're stuck in the exam and like in the exam you might be a bit stressed out, there's silly ways of remembering things. I love silly ways of remembering things. The easy way is income. The word income starts with what letter? It starts with a letter. Hopefully you'll remember that. I. Yeah, do you see this? This bit over here, it looks like an I, yeah? That therefore is where income is. The other way of remembering it is, in terms of theme 1, income elasticity of demand. What is the abbreviation of that? Well, income elasticity of demand is YED. What axis is this? Maths people, you don't need to be a maths person. That's Y-axis. Y, income. Okay, easy. Knew it. So this is cumulative share. So cumulative share of income. I'm going to do that as a percentage. And this is cumulative share of households or population, whichever. Okay, and then that. Okay. The very first thing that you guys need to always draw is the 45-degree line, which is the line of absolute equality, yeah? So 45-degree line, those of you who do maths, y equals x, that is the line of absolute equality. Now, obviously, in reality, like economies are not going to be operating on that line. There will be a curve, yeah? So let's start like fairly curved out like that. I mean, that is not the nicest curve in the world. It will do. And remember what we just said in our analysis, we just said that inequality is going to decrease because of the fact that you're protecting the low-income workers in the economy and allowing them to basically earn a higher salary. Well, that will do something like that, yeah? So that. Easy. And so you can now show off, you can talk about the Gini coefficient. Well, the Gini coefficient, you should know, ranges from 0 to 1. Again, how do I remember it? 1 looks like an I, inequality. Yes, that's absolute inequality. Can't bother to write it out. Here you go, absolute inequality. And then the other was obviously absolute equality. So what's happening to the UK's Gini coefficient? or the UK Gini coefficient is likely to decrease, yeah? It is currently 0.35, by the way, for those of you that want to know. You don't need to know. It's not a big deal. You don't need to throw in too much knowledge. It's going to be from the data anyway. But the point is that if I basically give a higher wage to these drivers and I protect them from monopsony power and I improve their living standards and I reduce income inequality, the Gini coefficient decreases. Easy? Let's evaluate. I think a clever evaluation is to talk about how actually the very people that you are you're trying to protect, it may backfire and you harm them. Now, sorry if this is bringing back a bit of trauma, and I don't really like to discuss older papers that I've gone already. Guys, the 4-marker in paper 1, I don't even remember it, was basically to draw a diagram to illustrate the effect of an increase in the minimum wage. We're going to draw it here. And the reason why is because I'm going to show you guys something that happens whenever minimum wage goes up. So if I draw a very basic supply and demand diagram for the labor market, so here we go. So quantity of labor over here, and this is the wage rate, yeah? Okay. So here's supply 1, or let's do S of L, and this is the demand for labor over here. You can write equals MRP, you don't need to, yeah? I'm going to start off straight away with them having a minimum wage to start off with, yeah? So this is the starting point over here, yeah? So this is NMW 1, yeah? Or W1. Okay. Well, at that initial minimum wage, do you guys agree that the amount that was being demanded of labor was this, Q1, and the amount that was being supplied of labor was Q2? So that was the initial unemployment rate. Okay, so I'm going to label that as unemployment 1. Okay. When the government now raised the minimum wage, and it basically says an increase, but a pretty substantial increase as well. Now, I don't have to show it as a substantial increase, but I'm going to just raise it somewhere over here. Yeah. A few things now happen that we will explain as part of the evaluation. The very first thing that happens is can you see that there is a contraction along the demand curve from Q1 to what we'd label as Q3? Why? What's the logic? I always want you guys to ask yourself the question why, because if you ask yourself the question why, it allows you to develop your points in more detail. And often the why is very easy, it's just logic. Well, the logic is this, is that the firm is the demand, yeah? They're the ones that demand labor. Do you guys agree that at the higher wages, they will demand less labor? It's less enticing for them to hire as many workers. They can't afford to hire as many workers because of the fact that the wages are now higher. Supply, on the other hand, is all the way over here, Q4. More people want to work. Those people that were economically inactive now decide, hey, I want to work now because the wage is being paid higher. There's more incentive basically to work, yeah? Is that clear? The last thing is that you just then show the level of unemployment has gone up, okay? Unemployment too. Okay. The point then is this, is that you know how you're protecting these workers and you're essentially going, oh, look, we're making sure their living standards are going up. No. And the other thing that might happen is if restaurants, like when you go into a McDonald's, for example, or different Tim Hortons, I don't know if anyone knows who Tim Hortons are, but what you're greeted with now that you weren't greeted with about 5-10 years ago is a self-service machine where you make your order and then just go and collect it, right? What does that mean? It means that they basically got rid of a lot of the staff, like the waiters, for example. I know you don't get waiters at McDonald's, but the waiters. And as a result, that would have resulted in structural unemployment. The people that you were meant to protect, that the minimum wage is meant to protect, actually their skills, basically they might be replaced by automation. And as a result, you get structural unemployment. Those workers are now worse off. Living standards, not up, down. Easy? Let's go. Right. I am absolutely shattered. I'm sure you guys are as well. I will do a few more things. I did this. It's on my list. Okay, right, let's do exchange rates properly. Just give me a minute to breathe. Okay. Exchange rates. I need us to understand how to answer exchange rate questions like this. And what I need you to understand about exchange rates is the following. There are 3 types of exchange rate systems that you need to know. Number 1 is a floating exchange rate. A floating exchange rate is where it is determined by pure supply and demand, free market forces. There is no intervention by the government or the central bank. It's simply people buying and selling the currency on a day-to-day basis, on a minute-by-minute basis, that will affect whether the currency appreciates or depreciates, yeah? Let's understand the kind of things that you're looking for that will affect the exchange rate then. Let's start. So if I draw the following. So let's say it's in terms of the pound, yeah? So price of pounds, let's say dollars, Here's the quantity of pounds. I always want you guys to draw supply and demand and work out what's happening on the basis of supply, like based on the context, sorry, to supply or demand, yeah? You want. Okay, let's actually begin with the very context that we just did a 25 marker on. The context that we just did a 25 marker on was people having higher wages. So let's say the minimum wage has been raised, or wages generally across the economy is rising, yeah? Okay, if wages are going up, one of the things that hopefully you know about, and if you did the 25 marker the other day, it's potentially one of the things you could have spoken about, is conflicts between objectives. One of the conflicts between objectives is the idea that as incomes rise, economic growth occurs, but at the same time, that worsens the current account. Why does it worsen the current account? It worsens the current account because when people have more money, they realistically now import more goods and services. If I buy more stuff in the UK, it has no bearing on the exchange rate. But if I buy stuff from abroad, how do I buy stuff from abroad? Well, the way that I buy stuff from abroad is I sell my pounds and I buy euros, dollars, yen, whatever it is. Okay, then if wages in the UK therefore go up, there will be more people selling pounds in the Forex to be able to import more goods and services. Supply shifts out and the currency depreciates. Cool? That's one context. Other example that we could talk about. Let's say the interest rates were set high. Now, I know the interest rates is a way for them to manipulate the exchange rate. But sometimes, like for example, the UK government or the central bank, when they adjust interest rates, it's not with the exchange rate in mind. They're basically doing it because their monetary policy at that time is that, yeah? So let's say hypothetically, the Bank of England raised interest rates. So still a floating exchange rate, still not them manipulating like I said, not purposely manipulating the exchange rate. What does it do? Well, we spoke about it earlier. One of the things to look for is hot money. Hot money is it going to flow into or out of the UK economy? Well, if interest rates are high, hot money flows into the UK economy. And if that is the case, do you agree that people are buying pounds? They're selling whatever currency they have, like euros and dollars and blah, blah, blah. They're buying pounds. If they're buying pounds, what's shifting? Demand. Demand shifting outwards to D2. The currency, therefore, in that instance would appreciate. Right, one last one to just kind of practice this and make sure we're all good. The last one is high inflation in the UK. So again, topical because the UK had high inflation a year ago, yeah? Okay, if inflation is high in the UK, how does that affect the exchange rate? Let's work it out. Well, do you guys agree that if inflation is high in the UK, are British goods more or less attractive in the global market? British goods are less attractive in the global market. They're less price competitive. Is there going to be more or less demand for British goods then? Well, there'll be less demand for British goods. And if there is less demand for British goods, there is less demand for the pound. Demand for the pound therefore shifts, in this case, inwards. And the pound depreciates. Cool? Is that really clear? Those are the things that I need you to recognize. Examples of papers where, in fact, you know what? Let's do one together really quickly. Where you can get, like, this could easily be an 8 marker from a, let's do a password together. Okay, right, so Unit 4, old spec, June 2016. Let's do it. Questions about Ghana. Right. Unit 4. June 2016. Right, I know you guys are probably exhausted, by the way. I appreciate you guys that have been here throughout this. Hopefully this is helpful. I will wrap up pretty soon because, as you can probably hear, my voice is literally going and I'm dying. But anyways, let's keep going. So the question is about Ghana. And it's going to be fine on Thursday. Fun. Anyway, sorry, I think I'm going crazy. The point is this. It says, it's a 10 marker. Obviously, you can't get a 10 marker, but you can get an 8 marker. You can get a 12 marker. So it could say something like this. With reference to the information provided, examine 2 factors which might have caused the depreciation of Ghana's currency, the CD. I'm going to just draw your attention to the answer straight away to show you exactly how to answer it. Yeah? I want supply and demand always. I want you to always be drawing supply and demand, shifting whatever's relevant to illustrate why there's a depreciation. And if you think about it, by the way, a depreciation can only occur if supply shifts outwards or demand shifts inwards. That's the only way. So let's look at it. If I look at the extract, it's a really long extract. So I'm going to just guide you towards where the answer is. Here we go. It's all here. Yeah? It's this. Nearly 3 years after the start of oil production in Ghana, which was meant to strengthen the country's fiscal position, the country faces a double-digit fiscal deficit after a 75% increase in public sector salaries over 2 years. Inflation is rising rapidly as the CD plunges. Go, let's go. Number 1, 75% increase in public sector salaries. People in Ghana have more money. Do you agree? If people in Ghana have more money, are they going to buy more or less imports? They're going to buy more imports. Do you understand why? Because of the fact that They have more money and therefore they'll buy more domestic goods. That doesn't impact the exchange rate, but they're going to import more. How do they import more? They sell the CD in the Forex and they buy other goods and other goods by whatever, like dollars, euros, pounds. Yeah. Is that super clear? Supply shifts outwards. Nice. The currency depreciates. Simple. A great evaluation to that, by the way, is to say that it depends on the marginal propensity to import. Can I explain what that word is? Marginal propensity is a really fancy way of saying, so what's marginal? Marginal is one more unit. So if I say marginal propensity, it means for every additional unit of income you earn, like for every extra CD that they now earn, how much of it do they import? Because if they spend most of their extra earnings domestically, that isn't going to impact the exchange rate very much. But if they import a lot of their goods and services, that can be the biggest factor. It's like magnitude, but it's a very good magnitude point. It's to say, hey, actually, this is like a really big deal because of the fact that if it's a high marginal propensity to import, they'll import loads. And as a result, the exchange rate is really going to depreciate. That's one. Yeah. Number two. The second thing is all here. Inflation is rising rapidly. Okay, cool. Let's chat. If inflation is high in Ghana, are Ghanaian goods more or less attractive in the global market? Less attractive. If they're less attractive in the global market, is there more or less demand for Ghana's products? Less demand. Less demand for their exports means less demand for their currency. The CD, demand shifts in, the CD depreciates. Analysis. Finish. Draw it, supply demand shifts inwards. Yeah? Okay, let's evaluate. Evaluation is really straightforward, is that it depends on relative inflation rates. It doesn't matter what their inflation rate is. If their main trading partners have even higher inflation than them, then actually that's not really a big contributing factor. People will still buy Ghanaian goods. The other thing that you can mention, by the way, is that even though you may not be price competitive, you may be quality competitive, in which case it's all good. Is that really clear? Those are the kind of things that you look for when it comes to exchange rates. Okay, the other question, by the way, if you have the time to practice this, is June 2013, Unit 4. It's question number 5. It's about the reasons for why the real, Brazil's currency, has appreciated. Yeah. So again, go and practice that to practice exchange rates if you'd like to practice exchange rates. The last thing, just to do a few more things, and then we will wrap it up pretty soon, is in terms of fixed exchange rates. What is a fixed exchange rate? A fixed exchange rate is where you basically fix your exchange rate, your peg your currency against another currency. And I'll just explain how that works. So let's say the UK decide to fix their exchange rate against the US dollar. Okay, so at one point we actually did this in the 1970s. So here's the pound and here's the dollar, yeah? Whenever the dollar depreciates by 3%, the Bank of England are going to need to intervene and devalue the pound by 3%. Whenever the dollar appreciates by, let's say, 1%, the Bank of England are going to intervene and revalue the pound by 1%. Now, I need you guys to understand the way in which they do this. They predominantly will do this through something called foreign reserves. What are foreign reserves? Well, foreign reserves are other currencies. So, for example, foreign reserves in the UK are dollars, euros, yen, blah, blah, blah. Okay, right. Let's go through two scenarios. The first scenario is I want to revalue the pound. How do I revalue the pound? Well, the way I revalue the pound, it's really important to understand that I can either buy pounds and therefore sell foreign reserves, or I sell pounds as the Bank of England and I buy up foreign reserves. Do the thing that you need to do to the pound first, and then the opposite is the foreign reserves. So do I need to buy pounds or do I need to sell pounds? I need to buy pounds. Because if I buy pounds, what shifts? The demand for the pound will increase. Yeah? Demand shifts outwards. And can you see, what does that do? It causes the value of the pound to go up. It revalues the pound. So what was that? That was buy pounds. And if I'm buying pounds, I sell the other thing, which is foreign reserves. Cool? The opposite. If I want to devalue the pound, so let's scroll down over here. What do I do now? How do I make it weaker? What if I supply, demand? Same axis as before, by the way. I'm just running out of energy. You guys can obviously draw it properly. What do? I sell pounds and I buy foreign reserves because then supply shifts outwards and that devalues the pound. Sell pounds, buy foreign reserves. Yeah. By the way, in terms of this, that's how they fix the exchange rate. The third thing as well, by the way, is called a managed exchange rate, where it's not fixed against anything, but they intervene from time to time to manipulate the exchange rate. Yeah. So in that context, by the way, a really good paper to do is October 2020. I'll double check now. I'm pretty sure it's October 2020. So it's one of the COVID years. I'm fairly certain it's 2020. Paper 3 about Turkey. Let's do it. Let's quickly look it up. So October 2020, paper 3. Oh, there we go. You guys must be shattered. I'm sorry. I will wrap up pretty soon. Okay, is this about Turkey? Hopefully it's about Turkey. We're good. Yay, Turkey. Okay, right. There we go. Explain how the Turkish central bank intervenes in the currency market to prevent excessive appreciation or depreciation of the Turkish lira. Okay, let's chat. You just needed to explain, based on the extract, by the way, it was talking about how the currency had madly depreciated, hence the A marker, and why they were worried about the currency depreciating so much. But there are a couple of things that you could do. So you just need to basically explain how they can revalue the lira. And the way you explain it is simple. You go, the Turkish central bank can revalue the lira by buying lira in the foreign exchange market and thus selling foreign reserves. You draw a supply and demand diagram, you shift out the demand for the lira, you summarize, like you draw the equilibrium, and that's it, okay? And you're good. Okay, right. To wrap up, I'm going to basically do a quick, like a couple of things actually before I wrap up, where I'm just going to talk for a little bit. So bear with me. First and first, the first thing is the judgment. In a 25 marker, I want you to make sure that you are doing a judgment. Normally, the judgment, I would argue about whether the microeconomic effects are more substantial than the macroeconomic effects or vice versa. It's subjective. There's no right answer. Just make it clear that you're trying to basically do a judgment. So, for example, if I were doing a question about, let's say, protectionist policies, I would explain that protectionist policies have a negative impact on both a micro and macro level, but it's more damaging on a macro level because on a micro level, if firms are able to switch to domestic consumption, to domestic consumers, or if they're not big exporters to begin with, not that big a deal for them. Then in the judgment, I can also say the government should basically try to like remove protectionist policy in the long run, engage in free trade, leads to like living standards going up. Okay. So the judgment I want you to basically take a side in terms of whether it's micro, macro, etc. That's one. Quick fire topics that could come up that I need you to know how to answer. If they ask you about a monopsony as a 25 marker, I doubt it, but you never know. Monopsony 25 marker will be dealt with in the following way. Monopsony power allows, for example, supermarkets to exert monopsony power to decrease their variable costs. Your micro point is profitability, therefore go up. MC and AC will fall. You draw the diagram, you summarize the diagram. You can evaluate it with talking about the CMA. You could evaluate it by speaking about big TNCs that they can't realistically push down their prices for. Yeah. On the macro side, think about what happens if you exert monopsony power and suddenly now your goods are cheaper. Do you agree that you become more price competitive? Therefore, exports are going to go up. Imports may go down because people buy less abroad and buy more domestically. Exports, imports, components of AD shifts out. Injection, multiplier, go. Yeah. Now the evaluation to that, it depends on relative inflation rates. Other countries, they might have monopsony power being exerted in those economies, and therefore you may not be price competitive. The regulator could step in as well. It could be that they might be price competitive, but you may not be quality competitive. It might be that the quality of the goods start to deteriorate because the farmers producing whatever it is that you need them to produce are now sacrificing quality because their profit margins are being squeezed. Does that make sense? That is a potential that you could do, you can explain and go down. Yeah. Exchange rates. If we're dealing with the appreciation or a depreciation of a currency, the macro point is easy. Depreciation, more price competitive. Exports go up, imports go down. Justify why. X minus 7 is a component of AD. AD shifts out. Injection, multiplier. Evaluate it with Marshall Lerner Jacob. Did it earlier today. From the perspective of firms, do you guys agree that if they're more price competitive? No, by the way, you can make the exact same point on a micro level as you did on a macro level. No problemo. As long as you're doing it through the lens of micro. So if they're more price competitive, do you guys agree that AR and MR will shift out? They're going to sell more goods. But you can also have done it in terms of they are, what's it called? Their imports are more expensive. So I could have done profits go up or go down. Whatever I did in the analysis, I can do the opposite in evaluation. Because I could say, actually, their imports are now more expensive. And if they are more expensive, their MC and AC are going to go up. Is that clear? Those are the kind of things that I need you to be able to do. A couple of things before I let you guys go. One, I'll be posting an answer that I wrote for you guys about the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of market failure in the financial sector on our social media channels. It will go up either tomorrow or on Sunday. So please look out for that, revise off that. Recognize that in all the essays that I do, I always write more. I basically write more than what you need to. You don't need to write that much and you don't need to make that many points. But the points are all valid. The points are all theoretically sound. Yeah? A couple of things ahead of your exam. Firstly, I know that it's really difficult to get deep, to remotivate yourself because you've had a break. You're exhausted. You're probably very you've sat at the very least 2 exams. Some of you have sat 4 or 5 exams. Yeah, guys, honestly, it's worth it. You have worked so hard up to this point. Don't let paper 3 be your downfall. If you smashed paper 1 and 2, then let paper 3 be the knockout blow. If paper 1 and paper 2 floored you and you're on the canvas, get back up. because honestly, paper 3 could make such a difference to your grade. Work really hard. If I were you guys, what I would do is I would dedicate a lot of my time on practicing 5 and 8 markers and the timed conditions. The timings will go out again either tonight or tomorrow. Follow my timings. Make sure you stick to the timings. It allows you to then save time to be able to then use your time for the 12 to plan the 25. In the 25 marker, commit to a question, but commit to it once you've planned it. Once you know what the question is asking, and an answer, by the way, what they're asking and not what you wanted to ask, want it to be. Yeah. Please, please, please be very wary of timing. It is so time pressured. It is so time pressured. So even if you're finding the first part of the paper really nice, great. But use that time, save that time, go to the second part of the paper and smash that as well. Yeah. Guys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Sorry, I would have loved to have gone on for more. You can probably hear my voice. I have nothing left. I hope that was helpful. I hope you guys absolutely smash your exam. Like, I wish you the absolute best of luck. Please email me on results day. Let me know how it goes. And I hope you guys do so phenomenally well. All right. See you guys.